I managed to get a 2-1, and then I went on to a master's in ecology. And the reason I kind of chose that is I was very lucky to volunteer at a local SSSI that was managed by our local authority. It was an old clay pit, and it really gave me an enthusiasm into the outdoor environment, nature, wildlife, fish and ponds. And actually, there were a great bunch of people I worked with, which has been a consistent thing through my career in the environment. Once I kind of graduated, I was lucky enough to get a job at the Institute of Freshwater Ecology down in Dorset. I spent 2 or 3 years working on short-term contracts, surveying rivers, ponds, lakes, etc. And I got my first proper job with the National Rivers Authority, the predecessor to the Environment Agency. And then after a few years, I moved on to British Waterways, where I started back in 2021, about 20 years ago. Okay, there we go. And I just wanted to flag up a few amazing opportunities that the sector does bring. I mean, this is about a year after I started with British Waterways. I was working with protected aquatic plants on the Rochdale Canal and had a visit from the Minister of the Environment at the time, Michael Meacher. So an amazing thing to happen to me at the early stage of my career. And I know colleagues will talk a little bit about fish and fish pastures a bit later, but you know, another highlight from that very early part of my career, moving into British Waterways and Canal and River Trust, same company, just to change the title as we moved to a charity. I got to head up a project, £20 million fish conservation project, and we opened formally with Princess Anne last year, managing a team of 10, 12 people with 4 huge construction projects and amazing outreach. Again, it's sort of, after a little bit of a wilderness from an environmental perspective, coming back to doing fish conservation was really, really rewarding. Briefly about an overview of the sector. So, you know, the environment is a big thing to talk about. So what I've tried to do is just focus on the water environment, but, you know, I'm sure you all know that there's land ecology, terrestrial ecology, terrestrial vegetation, etc. That is a huge part of the sector, but leads people into that sort of area, SSSI management, all that kind of stuff, land management, working with agriculture. Air, generally for me, implies more of chemistry, environment, pollution, taking away things, but it's still a heavily controlled atmospheric discharges and is very important for rain quality, etc. Some of you may recall the acid rain issues that we used to have prior to waking up to the need to clean up our coal-fired power stations. Really interesting area and is still heavily regulated. But then water, for me and colleagues on the call, is our passion and enthusiasm, kind of all things watery. Hopefully, I don't need to list all these, but you know, the water environment encompasses many things: rivers, lakes, ponds, streams, canals, and the catchment that they sit in surrounding those environments is obviously really important. Rain and small streams flow through various areas of land, picking up their chemicals or being cleaned by them before they end up in the rivers and ponds. What opportunities and what organisations impact on this environment are quite diverse, and I did want to touch on a few of them for you to give you a sort of flavour of potential career opportunities. I've kind of bunched them. This is a simplification to some extent, but there are the regulators, the statutory organisations like the Environment Agency, hopefully you've heard about them. They're the regulatory organisation that is as part of the DEFRA family, and DEFRA is the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, a government department that oversees everything environment and farming. So both the Environment Agency and Natural England both sit within that, and they regulate different parts of that environment. So the Environment Agency generally do rivers, ponds, lakes, that sort of stuff. They have a big accountability for water quality and flood defence, flood protection, which I'm sure you've all heard about in recent years, has escalated up the agenda. To give it a bit of a context, when I worked for them, they employed around 10,000 people nationally, and I think that's up to about 12,000 people now. That's a huge employer in the environmental sector. Natural England, more focused on site protection generally. Again, I'm simplifying a little bit, but oversee SSSIs, special areas of conservation, SPAs, all that kind of stuff, and they're really supportive, and their driver is to improve what they can within their remit. Other side of the fence, so to speak, are some of the users of the water environment. I've just picked on Severn Trent. I sit in their catchment. We work with them quite a lot on the project within the sectors I'll talk about. They use the water for our benefit. So they abstract, they use reservoirs, lakes, river abstraction points to take the water, to clean it up, to provide us with drinking water and water that we can use around the house. They also recycle that water when we finish with it as a customer. Treatment works, and then they discharge it further down the catchment into the river. Their ambition, set by policy, is to improve that discharge and the quality of the discharges, and therefore minimising and further reducing the impact on the river systems. Are they doing as good as they could? Probably not. Is there a driver to do more? Probably there is, and I'll come on to that in a little bit. So there are huge organisations that have billions of pounds in turnover that also now have their own supporting ecological, environmental, career ecosystem within them. Somewhere in between those two are the NGOs, the Rivers Trust, Severn Rivers Trust being one of those, the Wildlife Trust, occupy that space, the charitable sector that has an ambition to continue and work with the organisations, prodding and poking, sometimes with, Severn Trent and the other organisations like that, to do more and use some of their money to good advantage. And the others working with the Environment Agency, Natural England, using some of their funding to do things that the statutory organisations can't do. And they're really, really good at getting public support to do that, which sometimes the NGOs and the statutory organisations can't do, is kind of really generate public interest. There's some bodies like us, Canal Rivers Trust, sit a little bit that overlap a few of those spaces. We use water, but we also provide public access. And we also manage our own environment. We have a team of about 35 ecology, environmental specialists that help us look after our canal and river navigation network. And then another area that is really important to us is the private sector, effectively. There's a whole host of private sector ecological, environmental consultants out there. I've just picked one that I know. I used to work with Penny to extent about 20 years ago. So it's an, again, amazing career. They do work for the organisations just meant. They also work for developers trying to, build your Tesco's, build highways, HS2. So there are lots of need for aquatic work, terrestrial ecology, environment, protected land, listed protected species surveyors, all that kind of stuff, all sits within that environment as well. A lot of this is all about recycling money. So we all need to be paid for our jobs, don't we? We all need, all these organisations need to get money in various means. So often you might come across, vying for funding, talking about how we can secure more investment for the sector, and that is changing at the moment. Is it becoming as easy as I'd like? Possibly not, but there's certainly more opportunity at the moment. I'll come on to that in a second as well. So why do we all need to do what we do, apart from enjoying working outside and with river and with nature? But various reports, you see it in the news almost weekly at the moment, the state of the environment, condition of rivers, condition of terrestrial habitats, state of the nation reports. This was one that was done a couple of years ago by Wildlife Trust. Natural England also do them, the Environment Agency. The story is not great. It basically concludes that the UK is one of the most nature depleted countries in Europe. It has been for quite a long time, and it isn't getting much better. There are definitely examples of things getting better, but overall the trend is downwards. And you see on the RSPB infographic on the right, 13% of biodiversity is endangered, drop of 36%. Climate change is having an increased impact on nature in the UK. 40% of invertebrates are moving their range. Birds are starting to come over in different times of the year. Urbanisation is encroaching onto the environment. Woodland management has got 9% worse, etc., etc. But two other big driving things as well. The country and many organisations, including Worcester City Council, have declared their own ecological emergencies. Obviously, we've got climate change. It's a big disaster looming, with a report just out this year that actually this week, if we don't start to do more on the climate, then we might reach the tipping point sooner than we might like. So there are lots of drivers in play to generate the impetus for us as a country, as a world, to do more, which will generate more opportunities for careers to help this and move us back in the right direction. And it is turning. It isn't all bad news. You know, I sometimes get a little down with it all, but there are changes in policy in the UK and in Europe to try and move this in the right direction. Is it as quick as some of us might like? Probably not, but at least it is moving. There's stuff coming through the UK government that is moving in that direction. You know, UK change from when we've left is emerging, and some of the stuff is looking quite good and is generally supported by a lot of the NGOs, but they're being prodded to do more. That sort of policy change is starting to help a little bit with the light bulb moment and providing a bit more cash for us all to do. You know, the example of unlocking the Severn, we've secured £20 million for what is essentially a river fish conservation project, which is unheard of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. You know, this amount of cash is there. It's the biggest natural environment grant from the National Lottery Heritage Fund ever. It's all adding up to justifying the increased investment in the sector, and hopefully that will continue to increase over time. And I did a quick Google this morning. This is the Environment Agency webpage. The 42 matches for environment sort of sector jobs. You know, as I mentioned, they probably employ about 12,000 people, give or take. They have a big environmental teams, both from flooding, natural environment, and there's a fish health, aging and species technician. You know, some really interesting stuff there that provides that great opportunity for to employ recent and new graduates. And there's loads of support now. You know, part of the aspect of this, part of the SRT's remit, part of Canal Rivers Trust, and this is my professional organisation, the Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management. I'm also a chartered ecologist. You know, there's loads of support out there to help you, help us look to do more in the sector, perhaps move into this sector as a change of career. There's loads of good stuff out there. And finally, the sort of, you know, the end summary for me, and part of this is from a project director on such an amazing project, working with such an amazing, motivated team. Actually, as I'm now, you know, a fairly big recruiter, I'm about to go out for 5 positions to help us on the Montgomery Canal restoration. We've got to deliver £14 million of investment, including 3 very large nature reserves. We've got 6 project management adverts coming out very soon. And from that recruited perspective, you know, you're going to get lots of support later in the session, but, you know, do what you can to volunteer, work and do bits for, you know, the Rivers Trust, the Wildlife Trust, get stuff that can really populate and look positive on your CV, not just for the CV's sake, but to get you experience meeting people and understanding of the sector and what's out there. Equally, read around, join WWF and some other things that you can do, like the local Wildlife Trust, and get the newsletter. Read around so you can talk broadly about the subject and what interests you most. Get some experience, you know, take little jobs, take little contracts. I mean, my first contract was 6 weeks. I remember the paycheck vividly. You know, don't be scared of getting your foot in the door, because once you're in there, it makes it a lot easier. And from a recruitment perspective, looking through lots and lots of CVs, these things stand out and make a difference. You know, be positive, do your best at whatever you can, because the rewards are really high. It's a really, really great sector. It's really rewarding. It's a great subject. There's never a dull moment in it. And there are really, really loads of great people, of which you'll hear quite a bit from colleagues that will come on after me. So hopefully that just gives you a little flavour from a recruiter's sort of experience, person's perspective. If you have any questions, I'm around for another 5 minutes. And I do have to duck off for an interview, actually, for a post of one of my colleagues' areas of the company. So yeah, hopefully you found that useful.
Thanks, Jason. That was really good. Just before you do duck off, we have had one question in for you, and it comes from Francesca. So she said that you mentioned that you did a master's. Would you recommend a master's, and when in your career would you recommend pursuing post-grad study?
Ooh, that's a really, really good question, and that's quite a difficult answer. I guess it's twofold. As a recruiter, it does define and differentiate, you know, CVs as you look at them. Essentially, you know, a degree is perhaps not quite essential, but certainly very, very desirable when you're looking at getting into the sector. I'll be surprised if there's anybody on the call, colleagues, that doesn't have a degree. Do you need a master's? I think it would separate you out, but it depends on your ethos and your desire in life. You go down a master's and it does narrow you down. You have to become quite specialist, do very detailed studies. You end up doing 6 months of a dissertation. You need to be very careful what you want to do. You also need to have a think about what you want to do next, because they're quite costly. I was very lucky. I got a European Social Fund grant way back then, so I got through quite lightly on the loan side of things. I got a lot out of it. I got my first window into working with the NRA up in North Wales, up in the lakes and streams of Snowdonia. So it was brilliant for me. I got a lot out of it, and it got me my first real vibe for wanting to work in the sector, and I met some great people, and it led me to get my first job. So I don't think there's a yes or no answer. You could leave and work for a while and then do it. That might be harder, so you need to really judge it for yourself. I probably would say, though, if there's a separator out for two equally experienced candidates, a master's might tip it over the point for you appointing somebody. But not saying that, you know, being positive and experienced and diverse and flexible might well outweigh that. It's not an easy answer.
Well, thanks, Jason. Thank you very much, and thank you for standing in at such short notice. That was great.
I am available on email if you want to share that later.
Yeah,
Alice,
we will do. Yeah, and we'll put it in the chat as well if people want that.
Great. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you.
Cool.
Cheers, Jason.
So the next one we're going to go on to is Tom, and Tom's going to give us a bit of a presentation and a talk on working in river restoration. So just bear with me a minute, Tom, and I'll give you the permission to share your screen.
Fantastic, cheers.
Let me find John on this. No, people want. There we go. You should be able to share now, Tom.
Fantastic. Right. Let me just get you ready for sharing. And share. Right. Can everybody see this?
Yep, we can see that. It's not in presentation. Oh, it is now. Yep.
Right. Fantastic. Right. Yeah. So, hi everyone. Obviously, my name's Tom. I work for the Severn Rivers Trust, and I have done now for just over a year. I wanted to talk a little bit in this presentation about a few topics, probably carrying on actually from what Jason's just talked about. So I wanted to do a little bit about my journey into the sector, what specifically river conservation is and river restoration in specifics, and what I'll also discuss as I go along about options for yourselves, how to get involved, because obviously with it being a career presentation, and then at the end I'll just summarise with a Q&A as well. So yeah, firstly, my journey. It's been an interesting one, I must say. So I've split this again down into three specific things, being both education, my direct experiences, and obviously that fundamental of needing a passion to get into the sector. Education was my journey, so a little bit like what Jason was just saying with his masters. I didn't do a masters. I did a 3-year degree in ecology and environmental management. It was actually had an industrial placement year, which I did at the Wildlife Trust for Birmingham and Black Country. That gave me some absolutely fantastic experience in the sector. If you ever get the opportunity to do an industrial placement, if you are studying, I would highly recommend it, or at least I would recommend trying to do a sort of job-like experience if you've not had that opportunity previously. Because what it will do is it will really focus your mind on what you want to do. And if you do go back to study, it really enabled me to see how that study is applicable to a work environment. That That top photo on the left there, I actually dug that out of a Facebook archive. And that's from 2007, whilst I was doing a shoreline survey at university. I look thoroughly pleased. Right. But I did want to stress, though, that education isn't the start of everybody's journey. It can really be a big hurdle to a lot of people thinking about getting into this sector. So, I mean, in reality, the biggest one to stress is volunteer, and volunteer some more. I mean, even with doing a 12-month placement, I still did additional volunteering alongside that. And I've listed out a few points there that I think are totally crucial about volunteering. Networking, transferable skills, you'll stay up to date with what's happening in the sector. Critical one there, make lifelong friends. It's not what you necessarily think you'll get from volunteering, but I guarantee you will. You'll gain confidence in talking to people like this, standing up, leading groups. If you go to the right sort of organisation or charitable organisation, you most likely will gain qualifications in the sector as well. So this will enable you to bolster your CV to help get your foot in the door. That next big bullet point there regarding career change, it's very easy to think, oh gosh, I'm already in a career, is any of this useful? Well, yes, it is. An awful lot of what you already do in one job is a very transferable skill. So me, myself, I started working in a lot of terrestrial wildlife management for the Wildlife Trust. I was there for 11 years. And now I've come into river restoration. And all of those skills that I learned, although they're in a very, very similar sector, they're transferable skill set. And finally, I know that Francesca asked about masters. Don't shy away from things such as like vocational qualifications. In my time in the sector, I've come across many, many wonderful individuals, and some of the ones that can really, really get a strong understanding of the sector are the ones that have done hands-on study or traineeships. Now, I think later in the talk we've got information about opportunities coming up, but I cannot stress traineeships and vocational qualification definitely a good way forward. Right, so what did I do? So I started off at my uni course volunteering. I was very, very fortunate that from my year in industry, when I finished at university, I was actually phoned up and offered a job. Now, very much like Jason, that was on a 1-month contract, which is, you know, not wonderful, but I took that opportunity. It's exactly what I wanted to do. 11 years later, I progressed through that organisation and been there a long time. I've now just listed off some of the skill sets that I developed and honed whilst I was there. You know, I had worked on wetlands, I've worked on rivers, community engagement. There's lots and lots of things that you can learn through that volunteering and job.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Tom.
No worries. It's just a little technical glitch. Right, networking, forging relationships. This, I think, for everybody will be the key thing that you could ever take away from volunteering, or even just getting your foot in the door. So this next slide, I've just thrown together some pictures of how these networking scenarios for me have worked out in my career. So the lady in the centre of the photograph there with the bag on, that's Julia Morris. She works for Dudley Council. I worked with her whilst I was at the Wildlife Trust over 11 years ago. She's now a key contact for me in the environmental sector. She helps me get work done on River Channel. Really, really useful. This young gent in the top photo is one of my old trainees, Doug. He also now works for Dudley Council, and he manages a number of riparian corridor sites. Again, that intrinsic link between how working with people can, you know, it's who you know. A lot of you may recognise this gent in the bottom left here. This is Neal. He works for Shropshire Wildlife Trust. He's heavily involved in the CABA works. He used to be one of my old line managers at the Wildlife Trust. And then this gent in the river doing a river fly kit sample, he's David. He's a recent trainee of mine. and was also a volunteer for the Severn Rivers Trust to continue developing his skills because he wanted to get into the sector. And he is now luckily just being employed as a river restoration officer for the Wildlife Trust for Birmingham Black Country. So all of these pictures and connections, you can see how they link together. Partnership working. Now, I just wanted to touch on this briefly. I know Jason talked about all those opportunities people can work for. And as an ENGO, it's vital that we link with these organisations. So for the Severn Rivers Trust, there's only 20 to 25 staff, and yet we have to cover a 220-mile river that covers 122,000 square kilometres. So it's really important that we can work with these organisations. So in here, you can see that we've got the Environment Agency and Severn Trent Water. They're key allies in the work that we do. So what is river conservation, and specifically, as we want to all know, the river restoration? Well, I thought primarily there's some real key fundamentals that go across the whole conservation movement, and that starts with identification of an issue. We then have to all sit down together or on your own with management, with your friends, your volunteers, the rest of it, and come up with a solution to that. Once we've got that, and I'm being invaded by the cat here. Once we've got that, we have to go out and try and secure some funding for that work. Once we've got that, it's moving on to delivery of capital improvements, and then following up with monitoring. And this helps us come back and do future identification of issues. So some examples of that might be finding a barrier in channel or a pollution source in channel, doing some monitoring and going, oh, why are there no inverts in channel here? Right, what's that issue? So that whole diagram, it's very simplistic, but you can see how it works, and it's something that I use all the time. So my role as an urban rivers officer, I try to follow up with all of these things. So looking at habitats, the diversity of them, connectivity, species richness. I do monitoring. Nice little photo there of me loving a bit of electrofishing results. I try to infuse the community. Community is a key part. I mean, I think Zoe's going to be talking about community engagement later. At the end of the day, a funded project only lasts so long. Now, it might have some capital benefits, but it's how we can influence people on the ground and what they're going to do as a legacy of a project that's vitally important. So always try and remember that. And that volunteering work that you'll have been doing, if you get a chance to do that, that's all part of that process. And again, as I said, securing funding. Now, I started my career at the Severn Rivers Trust being brought in to deliver a project called the Cradley Reed Beds Project. It was a small project that was over a 1 kilometre section of the River Stour. But what that enabled me to do is look at the wider implications of Water Framework Directive, issues in land management, pressures from domestic misconnections, CSOs, and invasive species and stuff like that. So what I've taken is all of that knowledge in that year, and that's now helping me build projects to keep me employed. So it's one thing getting a job, but the next stage is how you actively keep finding funding to secure your own role. And in volunteering scenarios, if you could even get to the point where you can go to a manager and say, I've come up with this project idea, here's some funding I've also found. You never know, you might even build yourself a job. So again, that blue star indicates where I was working recently. If we look just within this red square, what I've tried to do is just highlight some of the pressures I've identified. So the blue polygon that's just popped on is looking at the rural landscape and the pressures that can have on the urban area. Here's an example of the River Stour after it rained for 20 minutes. You can see the extensive amount of soil erosion that's mobilised in that channel. So although I'm a river restoration officer, my work on the ground helps identify issues that then feed into, say, land management work. So this, I think Elise may or may not talk about this catchment here. This is the Illy catchment that feeds into the Stour, and we're going to be doing a load of farm plans as the Severn Rivers Trust to try and impact upon that soil erosion problem. Flooding's an issue, so that blue line is the main river where it floods. That's a photograph in the Halesowen town centre. Within only 2 kilometres of the source of the River Stour, it's already flooding. So you can see massive pressures from urban landscape, too much tarmac, not enough SUD systems, which is sustainable urban drainage. That yellow polygon highlights the urban area. There's 400,000 people that live in that area. There's on that blue line of the Stour, there's over 20 CSOs that feed into it. So there's huge levels of human waste that go into the river when it gets in spate. Another problem in the bottom right, I'm not sure if it'll be very clear on your screens, but if you can see the orange patch, that's an example of some ochre that's seeped out from old mine workings. So for me, my role as an urban rivers officer is quite extensive, of whether it's dealing with direct pollution from industry, historic pollution, and lots of pressures, basically. In addition to that, this map here shows all of the potential land in the green belt that has been designated for potential housing development. So Jason talked about how influencing policy can have a big impact. And that's true, because if we can create sustainable housing options here that have like rainwater capture, might not be such a big pressure, but if they're not and they're just built willy-nilly all over the place, all they're going to do is impact further on our urban catchment. This slide is just a collage of photographs of some of the human influence that I've removed out of that 1 kilometre section of the River Stour. We managed to litter pick over 300 bags of plastic waste from the site. We managed to get in channel with volunteers and extract tyres, of which range from lorry tyres all the way through to moped tyres, bikes, and get them out channel. 150 tyres we managed to get out in the space of a couple of weeks' work. Rather interestingly, some of these tyres actually were some of the most fixed substrate that was housing cased caddisfly. So again, that process of undertaking that work has enabled potential future project work. Just get that photo of me off there before I get a bit disturbed. Right. Another issue, one of the things that we always look at as well as for river restoration is fragmentation of habitat, so barriers. Just got a little pop up there. So here's an example of some barriers, one that's completely disconnected on the left, so nothing's going to be moving up channel from that. On the right is a small wooden plank that was simply put in channel just to allow some abstraction, but wasn't a permitted input, all the way through to much larger barriers. All of these features fragment habitat up and link in, and admittedly they aren't going to cost £20 million to solve, such as the Unlocking the Severn project, but they're all crucially important, and even just a small brick barrier is a barrier that we want to take out if at all possible. This slide I've left in just quickly as to let me know that I've got a little video coming up regarding one of the barriers that I removed in my first year at Severn Rivers Trust. So I'll just click play. Hopefully this should work for you all, and I'll stop chatting whilst it's playing. Right, I'll just skip the funders, which obviously normally I wouldn't do, but just speeds it all up a little bit so I can stay on time. So yeah, that was just a small way that we sort of had an easement done on. From this photograph, it's only a small feature, but it's really good because you can see how it's altered the flow in the channel, which is, you know, nice for the fish. The other thing that it's done is it's lowered the waterhead on it, so further up channel, you can see that it's created this riffle on a nice gravel bed, which would be a nice spawning habitat, all because of just removing that one tiny little feature. So that'll have opened up about 2 to 3 kilometres of the River Stour in a low flow scenario. Obviously, in a high flow, a fish could just travel straight over the top. So it's only a partial barrier, but still worth doing all the same. I have got a couple of other videos as well, so I'll stop talking through this one. This one was just a wonderful little fish that I found, and I thought I'd just share it because it's wonderful. Very, very urban site. You wouldn't necessarily think you'd find anything. Just with my mobile phone off the riverbank, I was able to just pop it in channel, and lo and behold, there you go. There's a little bullhead, which was about, you know, which was lovely to find. But a lot of people, when you're talking to them in these urban areas, they don't expect you to find any fish, any wildlife, or anything at all. So it's a really crucial part of telling the story of why we do river restoration. Right, how long have I got left? I'm on time. Right, this is the latest piece of work that I've just finished delivering. I'll just quickly play this one, and then I should be able to take any questions. So that's a nice little one there, showing some of the scope of the work that we can do, whether it's weir removal, large woody debris installation to NFM measures. There's other works that we do as well, like ephemeral pools, back channel, you know, 2-stage steps on the side, planting, all sorts of fantastic work that we can do. The other thing I'd like to show is just some of the species that we find in the Stour. So this sort of like 2.5-foot eel dropped out of a tyre whilst we were taking it out of in channel. And then the other thing that we've done is on that circle diagram that I've explained, we do some monitoring. So we did some electrofishing, and some stonking great brown trout sometimes come out of the channel as well, like this. This was a lovely fish to find in channel. And again, something that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily expect to spot in a very urban watercourse. Have I still got enough time, Alice? Or because I've got one.
If you want to be really quick, Tom, yeah, we should have time.
It's all right. It's just one cheeky last little video. It was just sort of explaining the scope of work that I've been able to do at the Severn Rivers Trust. When I first joined, they gave me an opportunity to work with the Sustainable Eel Group, and this is that video. I might cut it off part way through because it does go on a little bit. I'll jump in there, Alice, to stop it. Whilst we'll be watching these eels for hours. But effectively, what that does is it sort of shows a fantastic opportunity I had once joining the organisation to do something I never thought I would do, which would be translocating eels. But yes, that's the sort of end of my small presentation. The only screen I forgot to add in there, which I really wanted to add in, was where people could go to look for future opportunities. So things like, I know that Jason mentioned CIE. I also wanted to mention the Institute of Fisheries Management, and they're also another really good organisation to look at. The Freshwater Biological Association, the FBA, the FSC obviously offer an awful lot of courses, and alongside the River Restoration Centre, the RRC. So those are some great opportunities for, out there for people to look at and courses to get involved in. Are there any questions?
Right, we've got a couple in, Tom. Thanks very much for that. One, not sure whether you'll be able to answer here. We might have to come back to you on this one, Will. So it is, within the EU Water Framework Directive, we need to reach good ecological status in the UK by 2027 for our freshwater ecosystems. River restoration and connectivity is a big part of that. What are the repercussions if good ecological status isn't met? And would this be financial repercussions?
Wow, big question. Yeah, so I think financial repercussions will be yes, because it's inevitably going to impact on all habitat, people and everything all along the way. Are we going to miss the targets? The answer to that will also be yes, unless the goalposts are moved, which is what I reckon may happen. Particularly in an urban setting, on the watercourse I'm working on, I would find it absolutely impossible that we would ever meet those targets, whether it's direct pollution input, habitat fragmentation. It's just, yeah, it's never ending. What I might be able to do is draft up a slightly better response to that outside of questioning, if that's all right, Alex.
That'd be great, Tom. Yeah, we'll get back to you on that one, Will.
Yeah.
And then just one really quickly from Francisco. Sorry, we were pronouncing your name wrong before. And she's asking, are the Traineeships yearly? So I think she's referring to the traineeships that you referred to, Tom, within your presentation.
Yeah, so the traineeships that I was referring to in my presentation were delivered through the Wildlife Trust when I was at my old employer. They were a 12-month traineeship, but I think Severn Rivers Trust are looking at doing Kickstarter traineeships, which are around 6 months in length. Does that answer that one?
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, we are looking at doing sort of more traineeships with Severn Rivers Trust from next year. And in terms of where the best place to find those traineeships are for a lot of organisations, they'll advertise them on their own websites, and a lot of them will also put them out through some of the generic kind of job sites, which I'll cover a little bit later on.
Yeah.
We've just got one more which will fit in quickly, Tom, and it says, you mentioned short temporary positions. Is this something that is common in the industry?
It can be, yeah, and those positions change. So like even this role at Severn Rivers Trust that I've got now, when I was appointed, it was 4 days a week for just 12 months, I think, or just less than 12 months. And within being in post at 2 months, it had been put up to 5 days a week, and I'm still here now, delivering an additional project. So it's that definite get your foot in the door. You tend to find that the way funding is issued in the sector, that a lot of job roles will come in sort of like 1, 2 or 3 year windows. But as I say, once you're in post, if you can identify those additional projects and source your own funding, you make your own job sustainable.
Right, we have had a couple more questions come in, but I'm going to leave those and we'll answer those and we'll get back to you on those, just because we're running a little bit over time and we need to move on, if that's all right. So we will come back to any questions that we haven't answered here. So thanks for Tom for that talk. Hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight into the world of river restoration. The next talk we're going to have is by Elise, who is our farm and wildlife advisor, and she's going to give us a bit of an insight into the world of land management. So again, bear with me, Elise, and I will give you the permission to share.
All right, thanks, Alice.
You should have that now.
No, still saying I'm disabled.
How about now?
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
Cool.
Hold on a moment then, everybody. Okay, let's go for okay, can you share that? Yep, I can see Debbie nodding. I think that's a good sign. Okay, let me just stick it on. Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Elise, and as Alice said, I work at the land management team at SRT. I think my talk is going to be in a similar format to Tom's, but in a slightly different order. So I'm going to start with the kind of work that we do within the land management team at SRT. Then I'll talk about kind of how I got into the industry, or how I got into working at SRT, and then just a few sort of tips from my perspective to get into land management in particular. Okay, so to start off with, land management at SRT. So a bit of an overview of our team. We are an operational team, and we currently have 4 farm advisors, a woodland specific advisor, and a GIS officer. And broadly, our role is to engage with farmers and landowners within our project areas. We provide advice in line with the project targets. So as an example, the couple of projects that I'm working on at the moment are NFM, so natural flood management related, but they can also be sort of focused on diffuse pollution or soil health. We also undertake some monitoring and sampling. Again, it will depend on the sort of project targets and project objectives, and we manage and deliver capital work programs. However, we also, that's not just it, and I think this covers or this is sort of included across the board. I know Tom touched on kind of all sorts of things that they do within the river restoration team, but I know across the board a lot of us will engage with local groups and communities. Again, a couple of the projects that I work on have got local volunteering groups as part of the project. They are actually sort of delivery partners within the project itself. So we work with local groups. We also lead discussion groups. So I am a facilitator for a farm discussion group, so that all sort of links into the project, but we get involved in that too. We're also involved in sort of larger scale things and sometimes sort of strategic catchment planning. So because we're the boots on the ground, the eyes and ears, we sometimes get the opportunity to kind of feed into higher level strategic catchment planning. So that's a bit of an overview. So the day-to-day to work in the land management team, this is a lovely picture of a soil pit, some really nice clay, heavy clay soil on one of the farms that I was working on. So day-to-day, what do we get involved with? A lot of it is toing and froing and liaising with landowners and farmers. We work really closely with farmers, more so than any other kind of group or partnership. So most of the time is spent kind of either meeting farmers on site and doing sort of site walkovers, or toing and froing sort of over the phone. We also, as this photo sort of indicates, undertake soil and water sampling. So quite often within the projects, because land management and by sort of default management of the water environment is so intrinsically linked to soil health, so it's really important to undertake monitoring of the soil. So we go out and we do soil sampling on the farms that we're working on. I can give you a bit more detail on that if people want it. Similarly, we check deployed equipment levels, so things such as level loggers and sondes, which are looking at water quality or water quantity in the channels within our target areas. As much as I like being outside, and I would choose to be outside, there is inevitably an element of sort of office work and report writing, which can't be avoided, but we try and keep it to a minimum. There's a bit of GIS mapping involved and sort of reviewing data, so reviewing GIS or models or sample results, data from those equipment that you've deployed, that sort of thing. And like I said, we get our boots wet and our hands muddy as often as possible. So a couple of weeks ago, I was out planting trees with volunteers. And like I said, we regularly get the opportunity to kind of be out on site, which is certainly my preferred method of working. So in terms of the sort of skills and knowledge that is required in order to work at land management, and this is not kind of specific necessarily to the water environment or even to working sort of within the Rivers Trust, this is just kind of general land management skills really. You really need to have an in-depth knowledge of agriculture. I'd say that's the fundamental sort of thing that you really need to have to start off. I would recommend that this also includes a level of sort of agroecological and regenerative methods. So increasingly, our projects are geared towards regenerative farming. So if you can kind of build up your knowledge on that basis, then that would really give you a head start in terms of interviewing and things like that. You need to have some knowledge of ecology and habitats, both for SRT, both terrestrial and aquatic. Now, I will admit that my sort of knowledge of agriculture far outweighs my knowledge of ecology. And probably a good point to note here is that it's really useful to make use of your colleagues. So Tom, for example, has got far superior kind of ecological knowledge than I have. So yeah, if you find yourself in a position where you perhaps are lacking in knowledge, don't be afraid to ask questions of your colleagues, because I'm sure they are more than happy to help. But you do need to have a bit of basic knowledge really, and particularly about habitats and kind of habitat management. That's really key. I'd also say that it's really important to know a bit about environmental legislation, particularly relating to agriculture. So for me and my projects, the things that are key are legislation around sort of slurry and silage storage and that kind of thing, to make sure that the farmers that you're going to see are within their kind of obligations really. I'd also recommend that you know a bit about subsidy schemes and policy. Anybody that works kind of even on the periphery of agriculture really knows how important this kind of subsidy scheme world is to the agricultural industry. So it's really key to have at least a bit of general knowledge about that. It's also really helpful to have GIS and mapping experience. So we're really lucky in our team. We've got Lloyd, my colleague, who is a GIS specific officer. So if you have kind of really in-depth questions or something that's really complicated, we are lucky enough to kind of have his knowledge to call upon. But it's certainly useful to have a bit of knowledge of that yourself. And finally, it's also quite key to have a bit of project management experience. So particularly at SRT, the operational teams, we have quite a lot of control as project officers in terms of kind of budget management and contractor management. So if you're confident that you can kind of keep a project to budget and keep a project to time, then that certainly will help. In terms of kind of other skills and kind of soft skills really that you need, I would say that being an excellent communicator is really important, which links quite well into the sort of diplomacy and negotiation. So some of the projects that we work on might not be so well received by the farmers that we're trying to engage. So you kind of need to have that ability to be diplomatic and potentially persuasive in your arguments. For why you want to be implementing the things that you're trying to implement on these farmers' farms. Similarly, I think that links in quite well with kind of partnership working as well. We work a lot with external partners. Like I said, I work really closely with a flood action group as part of one of my projects. And occasionally we have kind of differing opinions or differing sort of agendas and priorities. And so being able to kind of get over those hurdles is really paramount to the livelihood of the project, really. And of course, I think it's key for any kind of role, really, time management and prioritization. So like I said, as project officers, we have quite a lot of responsibility, and to be able to prioritize not only your workload, but also, like I said, sort of project issues is really important. So that's land management at SRT and in general. How did I get into the industry? So this is me in the pale yellow jacket with my little tweed flat cap on, like a Peaky Blinder. And I grew up on a dairy farm in Southwest Wales. So that was my starting point. And I know that a lot of people in land management have also started kind of with an agricultural background. What I would say is that if you don't have an agricultural background and you want to get into land management, please don't let it put you off. It's certainly, I found, to be a good basis, but it's not the be all and end all, and it's certainly not impossible to get into the sector without having that. So like I said, I grew up on a dairy farm. I went to a fairly standard kind of secondary school. As you can see, I did biology, geography, philosophy and dance at A level, so quite diverse subjects. And I don't quite know, you know, the delegates that we've got here today, the people that are attending, kind of where you're at in your educational journey. But don't necessarily be worried about kind of shoehorning yourself in or making sure that you've chosen the right subjects and all of that kind of stuff, because I think, as Tom mentioned, having wider experience is no bad thing. So after I'd done that, I did a BSc degree at Queen Mary University of London in geography, which was fantastic and I loved it. And I picked the course because it had the best field trips, but it worked out all right in the end. I got my degree was not too bad. And then I came out of university with this geography degree and thought, oh, I've got lots of transferable skills. I feel like I've learned a lot, but I'm still not quite sure kind of what direction I want to go in. I knew that I sort of wanted to work in agriculture or with kind of rural people and rural communities, but I wasn't quite sure kind of which direction within that to go down. So I kind of looked around and I then started a postgrad diploma part-time in rural estate and land management at Harper Adams Uni in Shropshire, which, for those of you that don't know, is a kind of agricultural university. So it specifies in agriculture and rural studies, really. And I would say that I probably learned most of the skills that I need for my job on that course. And I would really recommend, if you are looking at universities, to look at that postgrad diploma in rural estate and land management. It's really flexible. So from the kind of practical perspective of being able to fund it and work at the same time, you can do that without any issue at all. And the quality of teaching is really excellent. So I would thoroughly recommend Harper. So that was the sort of education side of things. But again, as Tom mentioned, education isn't necessarily the starting point for everybody. And kind of to broaden my horizons, really, I actually went and worked in the dairy industry in New Zealand, and that's what that picture is on the right-hand side. It's me milking cows on a dairy farm in Opanaki, so on the North Island in New Zealand. Again, really, really brilliant experience. It got me out of the UK and kind of to see other agricultural systems and rural systems, and I really learned a lot there. So again, diversity of experience, I think, is really key. So after I'd had my fellow in New Zealand, I came back and thought I probably ought to get an actual job now. And so I started working as a land agent in a traditional kind of land agency firm in the Midlands. And that is what I've been doing until I joined SRT in November 2020, so sort of mid-pandemic. I would say that throughout all of this, since the very beginning, and probably my farming background helped with this, I developed a really kind of strong personal and professional interest in regenerative agriculture and subsequently environmental conservation. And to be honest, that was the driving factor in me getting into environmental conservation and land management within that particular kind of environment, rather than the traditional land agency that I was already in. So finally, I think I'm probably ahead of schedule now. So tips to get specific, like I said, to kind of SRT or even the water environment, but just any kind of land management role. Like I said, you really need to have a good agricultural knowledge. If you've not got that through your background or your kind of family circumstances, again, as Tom said, I'm kind of echoing everything he said, really volunteering is the way to do that. So volunteering or working on farms. From the outside, sometimes the agricultural sector can seem quite sort of closed off to non-farming people. But I would say that that's not necessarily the case. Most farmers that you will encounter are always really happy to kind of answer questions and invite you onto farm. So yeah, persevere with trying to get some work experience on farms, I would say. Also, there's a really excellent kind of network of people on social media that are, you know, farmers that will promote their farm and their farming system. So once you sort of seek out one or two, you can really get the ball rolling and kind of really absorb all of these other alternative methods of farming through social media. It's a really great kind of way to learn. So off the back of that, get diverse experience, or as diverse as possible. So land management can be one part of all sorts of different sectors. So obviously we work, or I work in the land management team within SRT, so kind of focusing on the water environment and how land management of farms can impact the water environment. But land management can cover all sorts of other things. So it can be, you know, very small scale, much larger. You can have livestock systems, arable systems. It can be sort of community farms, smallholders. You can be managing terrestrial environments, aquatic environments. You can be, you know, land management of woodlands. There is all sorts of things that can kind of come under the land management umbrella. So I think if you're just starting out, it's really useful to get as much experience as possible in all sorts of different types of land management to really kind of identify actually which bit of land management it is that you are interested in or that's right for you. I'd also say don't be afraid to change direction. So I, like I said, worked for quite a long time in traditional, and what that meant was I was doing quite a lot of sort of legal tenancy work. It was for a really traditional firm, so it had a lot of traditional ideas, and I wasn't doing much environmental management really. And for me, I felt that that was the way things, farming is heading in an environmental direction, and I wanted to kind of go with that really and follow that. So I was for quite a while training to be a chartered surveyor in this traditional firm, and then all of a sudden sort of decided, actually, I don't think this is the right way. But by that point, I'd already been doing it for sort of 2 or 3 years. I'd obviously invested time, I'd invested my own money into kind of following this and kind of going through the route of doing these professional exams. And it was a big decision to kind of put a halt to that and kind of change direction, but it was absolutely the right decision. So I'd really say, if you feel like you're going down a path that perhaps isn't right for you, don't keep going down it, try something else, because it might be a better option. And one very last tip, I think somebody else later on is going to talk about sort of job applications and interviews and interview tips and that kind of thing. But one thing that I found has really helped across the board since the very beginning is that on job applications, if you are given a specific contact of a person, give them a ring before you submit your application. It certainly gives you kind of a head start. It gives you a better understanding of what the job is asking for. And having that contact initially sort of eases you into the interview process for sure. So I definitely recommend doing that. And I think that's it. Yeah, that's me done. Any questions?
Thanks very much, Lise. Yeah, we have got a couple of questions in that you might be able to answer.
Okay.
So the first is, would you say GIS is becoming a major factor or role within the environmental sector?
Would I say what is GIS?
GIS.
Yes, I would. Increasingly, you don't need to have kind of a huge level of knowledge, but it's certainly worth having kind of the basics. It will make your job easier because a lot of the data that you're given is far easier to digest if it's in a GIS format, if it's overlaid on a plan, rather than just looking at it kind of in a spreadsheet format. So to be able to, extrapolate the bits of information that you need and put them onto a plan is far easier than looking at it, like I said, looking at it on a spreadsheet. So yeah, I would definitely recommend kind of, increasing your skills a bit on that. And what I would say in terms of increasing your skills on GIS is there's a lot of really great free kind of open source data sets and freely available GIS kind of programs and software, and just kind of get it and play around and look at YouTube videos. Honestly, you can learn anything you want to learn via YouTube, so that's probably a good resource.
Cool. Hopefully that answers your question as well, Elizabeth, on sort of recommendations for improving those skills. So the other one we have is from Francesca. So it's, are postgrad diplomas more vocational / applied, would you say?
Yes. So the reason that I did the postgrad diploma rather than the master's was because you basically did, I think it was 2 or 3 more modules rather than doing a dissertation. And from my perspective, I felt that that would be more beneficial to me to kind of increase that breadth of knowledge, rather than, I think, like Jason said earlier, if you choose to do a master's, you are sort of specialising to a certain degree. So the postgrad diploma worked better for me, definitely more vocational.
Cool, thank you very much. And just as a follow-up, Tom has very kindly posted a link into the chat for those that are looking for GIS skills as well. I think that's all the questions we had for you, so thanks very much. That was really good. And yes, hopefully you've now got an insight not only into river restoration but also to land management. So our next talk is going to be from Dewi. So Dewi works, well, he'll explain a bit more. He works sort of across 2 teams within Severn Rivers Trust, but he's going to give us a bit of an insight into community engagement work. So let me just give you the permissions, Dewi.
Thank you very much. Well, that's been really good. Thanks to the last speakers. My name's Dewi Morris. I haven't got a flashy PowerPoint presentation, but I have got some slides somewhere. So you'll just have to listen to my voice for a bit. I work here in the top end of the catchment, and I'm a community engagement officer, which is quite an overlooked area of career within the environment. It's mainly, the environment's mainly to do with the physical world of soils, water, air, wildlife, etc., etc. And my job really is to engage the community which haven't got an interest in the environment. There is a huge community out there which have got an interest in the environment, believe it or not, and they love birds, bees, etc., etc. Members of the Wildlife Trust, Ecological, whatever. But there's a tremendous lot of people out there that have no interest in the same sort of things that we share right now. And it's been my career to engage the unengaged in the environment. So, and I've been working in it for 35 years, and I developed an interest and my career in an urban setting. I come from Shropshire. I left all my childhood was spent outside in the environment, doing all sorts of things. I had my best friend's dad was warden of the local Field Studies Council Centre, which is a huge big organisation, and their motto is towards a better understanding for all. So with that, I think there was a tremendous influence on me, actually, because I qualification-wise, I aim towards the physical sciences, geography, biology, etc. And I got my A-levels in geography, English, history, general studies, and then did a geography degree in Worcester University, which is in the centre of the Severn Uplands. And my specialist subject was the melting of glaciers in 1980. We went up to Switzerland, studied various different glaciers that were suffering and melting quickly. And ironically, I wrote 25,000 words on that. And it sat on a shelf right up until I started working for the Severn Rivers Trust in about 2 years ago, which is amazing. And so my first job, I worked as a volunteer after my geography degree. You've heard Tom mention about volunteering. I met Aaron, who's speaking later, as a volunteer. And I must say, working as a volunteer gives you wings within the conservation career, because it gives you the ability to work for all sorts of outfits. You can work for a rights away team, you could work for a team of ecologists, you could work for a team of bat surveyors, you could work for a team of conservation workers, Wildlife Trust, the National Trust, all sorts of things, but they all have a different take on working in the environment. And if you volunteer for all sorts of outfits across the way, that really does build up a huge amount of experience, hands-on, physical, outside type with people experience, which comes in great steads for when you actually you're sat there in an interview and they say, oh great, so you've got a postgraduate diploma in environmental conservation, have you? So what else have you done? So you may have a beautiful qualification, you may be able to identify the blue-winged mayfly from 100 meters, but what they're really asking for you is to do with your overall experience and fundamentally communication skills. So I worked on a nature reserve and for the Field Studies Council, and the people there were ringing birds. They were doing huge big plant transects, very scientific based activities, all with binoculars. You had to have a permit. And the big sea change came to me was I realized that everybody on the nature reserve loved nature, but the actual planet itself was under quite a lot of attack from elsewhere, all sorts of bad practices, all sorts of things that people could actually change. So I volunteered there for 18 months. I got given, or I was appointed as a supervisor for 15 people who were long-term unemployed. So they've been unemployed for 6 months, and then they were told if they didn't come to see me at the nature reserve to do conservation on the nature reserve, they'd have their unemployment benefit withdrawn. So you can imagine how keen they were turning up 4 days a week at my nature reserve. And I was giving them a shovel saying, about our ditches, I'd like you to help them out, please, and work all day for the same money that you get on the dole. So I had quite a tremendous baptism by fire there, and learned a lot about gaining people's cooperation and communication skills, conflict management. Not a lot of people liked being asked to do all sorts of things, the rest of it. And that came to an end in 18 months. But I did get a tremendous experience of leadership in all different sorts of ways. And often when you're working in the environment, the best way to lead anything is to work alongside people. It's my top tip. And then I've got a job in Essex and Essex County Council local authorities, and I managed a park, a countryside park. It's a massive big 600-acre site, which is an ex-royal hunting forest surrounded by Basil the Newtown, which is a huge, massive, big, sprawling urban conurbation, like where Tom lives, but it was kind of like a new town. And I was managing the only green space. So this green space was absolutely packed with people on a regular basis doing all sorts of things that people like to do. So they like to cycle, picnic, they go for walks, walk their dogs, etc., etc. So I ended up on this country park with a geography degree, not a countryside management degree. I'd volunteered and built up a big range of skills in estate skills. So I got a load of qualifications in tractor driving, chainsaw, strimmer, herbicides, all that sort of thing. So I had loads of practical qualifications, but fundamentally I was managing a very public park. And as such, one of the things I had to do as part of my job was to get together a guided activity program, which means every weekend I would say, meet the ranger at 1 o'clock and it'd be like, could be anything, could be a bat walk, could be mowing a meadow, could be a fungal foray, could be looking at trees, could be going for a guided cycle ride, could be all sorts of things. And so based with this challenge, I built up this huge repertoire of skills that I had, but also I drew in a lot of other organisations outside of the country park to help me run these activities. So we had all sorts of things going on, and it give me a huge big repertoire of skills to engage members of the public. And I was there for 6 years, and as part of that, I also received a lot of training. I went on a lot of courses, which was really valuable for my later career. I went on an environmental art course, or teaching about the environment through the arts. So we covered dance, drama, sculpture, painting, all sorts of things, but teaching about the environment through the arts. And I also, there was this thing which still exists, it's called the Earth Education Institute for Earth Education, and they teach about the environment through immersive learning. So I devised a lot of activities for the families which would be immersive. So in other words, hands-on. In other words, standing by a side of a piece of ground with some equipment which you could take parts of the environment away with you. And then you could actually look at beautiful things like keys. There's a key. All the different creatures, etc., etc. And we did flower walks, we did tree walks, we did fungi walks, we did everything, mini beast hunting. And I did a load of stuff, pitched activities for families, from what's this wiggly worm type of thing, to field clubs who were looking at various different fungi and drilling down different species. So I built up a lot of skills, and I also I got a lot of other organisations to come and join me. So the bat group came to join me, and then I learned about bats. The moth group came to see me. I learned about moths, etc., etc. So I was there for 6 years on the urban fringe, and I suddenly realised my childhood up in the countryside was lovely, but a lot of people within the cities weren't engaged in their environment at all. The environment was something separate to them, and they had no kind of like means to actually engage with the environment, such as skills to go out for a walk and come back to the same place. Get skills to go and explore the like a wood and bankside rivers and be safe. So I started to kind of like run a lot of activities which would upskill a lot of my audience that came to see me for my guided activities. Okay, and then I moved to Manchester, where I was a river valley warden, which is pretty much what I'm doing now. I'm a community engagement person for that, but I was a river valley warden, and they were cleaning up the rivers of the Mersey and the Thames. The team, which was industrial rivers, just like Tom was talking about, with horrific amount of sewage going in there, pollutants, etc., etc. And my job was to keep the green space in South Manchester in Stockport clean, safe, and well maintained. So I did a lot of river cleanups, working with volunteers. I did a lot of work with the police and emergency services because there was a tremendous amount of antisocial behaviours going on. And all the time bringing in other agencies, not with my skill group, to come and help me manage the urban space and keep it clean, safe, and well maintained. So over the years, I've really, from being a volunteer on the nature reserve, but really kind of like in areas in conservation, countryside conservation, and the work that I do, fundamentally, there's not a lot of courses that can cover the entire skill set that you may have. So my recommendation as in your early careers is just trying to give yourself as much wider experience as possible. And volunteering, I can't mention that word, and that's the way I got into it, volunteering and standing alongside people that knew how to lead pond dips. Only this morning I was saying to my colleague who wants to concentrate on soils, because soils are very important for flooding within the Severn Rivers catchment, of course. She'd never done like a mini beast hunt or a pond dip, and she wasn't confident to do so. And I volunteered today in my career to say, look, if you fancy doing a pond dip or a river study, I'll come in and help. I'll run it. You can be my assistant, and next time you'll have the confidence to run it. So that's the way you learn. Stick yourself in the deep end. So that was Manchester, and then I worked in Northamptonshire again for local authorities, again as a public-facing person that was opening the gates of the country park, the green space. It was a huge, big British Waterways at the time, or Canal Rivers Trust as it is now, reservoir, which was fed all the canals. So my colleagues were the Canal Rivers Trust now, etc., etc. And we did an awful lot about boats, the canals, history, ecology, etc., etc. And I was building up my skills for community engagement within local authorities. So within the local authorities, we had an arts development department. We had an environmental health department about smoking cessation, and we had a walks to school department. So I was, because the green space was green and I was pretty much on the side of the public, I would engage people in smoking cessation, for instance, or planting a millennium orchard within the country park. So I'd use outside stimulus to actually organise events within the open space and engage members of the public in all sorts of shapes and sizes. So that's part of my activity, and based on that, the community engagement side of things and the amount of different events and types and popularity and mistakes that I made in organising events. I'd like organise a beautiful event like the countryside comes to town. I'll be in the middle of the town centre with like a mini aquarium, etc., etc., and nobody be there. and so which is I was thinking why, and then I realised that all I had to do was actually go to the car boot sale and have the same exhibition and have a maximum impact. So I learned an awful lot about actually maximising the impact of what we do as an organisation. Now I work for Severn Rivers Trust. Maximum their impact as an organisation on the land with the communities that actually surround it. And I can't emphasise enough the importance of working with the communities. Tom, as you see those pictures earlier on, him working with the community, yet all in big cleanups. Once the communities that surround the green space or the environment or the river or whatever you're working with actually see that you're working as a force for improvement for wildlife habitat and for people's safety and enjoyment coming down to them, you become really popular. And it's a side of an organisation like the Severn Rivers Trust has recognised this, so it has got a community engagement department. Hooray! And as part of that, this Unlocking the River Severn, there's a huge big visitor centre, partnership work with Canal Rivers Trust, and a huge community engagement programme with schools, etc. Right. Working for the Northamptonshire, I was brought into the Chief Executive's offices one day for what seemed to be like a disciplinary. I was very concerned, but they said we thought we had employed a countryside manager, not an environmental education officer. And I can see, from my point of view, it's one of the same thing. If you are managing an area of green space or a river valley catchment, etc., you're really managing it for the members of the public. Wildlife first, of course, but members of the public that enjoy it and surround it. So unless members of the public are engaged with their environment or empowered to actually be able to do so, then as an force for good in the environment, you are really going to be quite alone, and the environment on the long term isn't going to be cared for. How are we doing on time?
Just got a couple more minutes left, do we?
Excellent, right. So public space, open space, community engagement, that's what I do. I've worked with loads and loads of different other departments and partner organisations. The communities, I've mentioned that people doing their, I have the police, fire, etc. I've also worked with the community service people. Those are the people doing the community hours. So they've joined me, just like Tom, cleaning out huge amounts of tyres from rivers, massive big public open space cleanups, etc. I think a huge big skill set you as forging your career in conservation is actually looking for and securing sources of grants funding for your career in the future. And unbelievably, you may be sort of out there, like tomorrow I'm going to be doing a Riverside Day with the children, but at the same time I've actually got to look for sources of funding to actually employ me after my contract ends. So that's a huge big thing. I think I've mentioned volunteering. I don't have to mention it again, but learning from your peer group, just stand alongside a practitioner doing whatever they're doing, surveying, estate work, whatever it is, and you'll pick up the skills. And I can't emphasize that as being super important. Also, stepping up to the challenge, like just taking on board part of an activity. Say, for instance, I don't know, you're building a set of steps in a wood so people could get through it. And there's some newbies on your volunteer group. Just take them, volunteer, take to the leader. I'll take these, and we'll build that set of steps up there. So it can't be, just challenge yourself. I remember doing a hedge laying course. I got the hedge laying course book in one hand, and the billock in the other. But together we laid a hedge. Lastly, I think it's lastly now.
Yeah, go for it, Dave.
Good. Job interviews. If you don't look, the big thing about job interviews, if you get shortlisted, you're got the job. All you got to do is to convince the people that are interviewing you that that is your job. Okay, Alice's point about ringing up a person before you go for an interview, that's really valuable because they recognise your voice for a start off. But being at the interview, just think you've got the job already, because you've met all the criteria, which is fantastic. The next thing is, after the interview, obviously at the interview, listen to the question, all of the question, because they score everything by points, the interview panel. And then if you don't get the interview, the job, ring them back, because they would have had agreed to 10, 20 questions, whatever it is, and each question is it's got points, and find out where your weak spots were. So if you didn't mention that you had to wear a hard hat whilst banging a fence post in with a huge big hammer, and they picked you up on health and safety, they'll tell you that you didn't score well in health and safety, so therefore you can mug it up. So that's my top tip. Interview the interview panel after you didn't get the job. Okay, so that's me. Oh, I ended up working for the Arts Council Wales as well as a cubic. So I was so good at community engagement. I ended up working for them for 4 years as a community arts development officer, but I was far too environmental. I cared about our planet and small brown furry things, and especially fish. So I left, and now I'm a member of the Severn Rivers Trust, and I'm really, really enjoying myself. It's great. Okay, any questions? Please fire away.
Thanks, Dewey. We haven't had any specific come into community engagement. One that has just come in relates to having qualifications in practical skills and whether you kind of need those going into jobs. There might be some others that want to chip in with an answer to this, but I would say if you get the opportunity to get those skills or get those qualifications, either through volunteering or other means, definitely take any opportunity you get to do them, but don't necessarily see not having them as a barrier to getting employment. Many employers will put you through first aid if you haven't got it once you've started, and there is definitely opportunity for continued professional development within many of these organisations. So if you get the opportunity to do them, take them, but don't see them as a barrier if you haven't got them. Don't know if anybody else wants to jump in with an answer on that.
But say for instance chainsaw qualifications, it's obviously very expensive, etc., to get that, and you really need a good reason to get it, but sometimes you may be working in conservation and you will need it. Is again, you can work alongside somebody using a chainsaw without using a chainsaw and pick up a tremendous amount of safety and the ways how to run activities such as coppicing, etc. So you can pick up a load of information which will be useful for you to work alongside qualified contractors, for instance. So,
cool.
Just to add to that quickly, if you don't mind, Alice and Louis, I've done a lot of shortlisting for traineeships at the beginning levels, and people stick things like first aid on there and other sort of basic level skills that you think are a core thing for a job, and sometimes forget simple things like learning to drive. So if you have it's slightly ironic that, you know, needing your own vehicle and learning to drive can be such a barrier to getting into conservation, considering we try to promote sort of like transport by bike, walking and things like that. But if you haven't got that would be probably my fundamental thing to stress, trying to get first above all other things, because you'll be amazed how it opens up a multitude of job opportunities just to get your foot through the door. I mean, the amount of shortlisting, you just go, oh, unfortunately, this person can't drive, or they can't drive, and it just it's literally a way of getting through the plethora of hundreds of applications that you get. So if that is the case and you can't drive, don't again let that be a barrier, but stress what you're doing about it or the processes that you're going about to, you know, move forward. Right.
Thanks very much, Tom. Debbie, just to let you know, Kat has said used to be an arts development officer and now retraining in this sector and love to pick your brain. So I have just put your email address in the chat so that Kat can make contact with you.
Great. Well, so what are the great? Good. Well, there's plenty of scope there. Huge amounts.
Right, we're going to have a quick break now. So originally we had coming back at past, but I think given we're running a little bit late, we'll make that 25 to. So if people want to have a bit of a stretch of legs, get a drink, and then we'll come back at 25 to for a workshop on the golden rules for job interviews. Cool. See you all in a bit.
Everybody, thank you.
Okay, so hopefully we've got most people back with us now. So our next section is actually going to be a bit of a workshop type thing that Alice Fallon is going to do for us, and it's going to be on golden rules for job interviews. I think you should have the permissions to share, Alice, if you want to try.
Thanks, Alice. I'll just try and do that now. Bear with me. So there we go. How's that looking?
Can't see it yet. Oh, there we go.
Brilliant. Okay.
Yep.
So if I put that into presenter mode. And make sure my phone's on silent. Right, okay, I think I'm ready to go. Okay, so yeah, welcome back everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here and talk to you all and present this hopefully a bit interactive workshop all about how to succeed in a job interview. It's, yeah, hopefully a few words of wisdom from me. I've done quite a lot of job interviews now and do a lot of recruitment for Severn Rivers Trust. My role is head of community engagement, so I line manage the team that Dewi was talking about earlier, all the work with people, with communities, with schools, volunteers, events and communications, and really how we get our message out about river restoration and about the conservation work that we're doing and get people involved. But I've also been on interview panels for trainees, for river restoration officers and land management and farm advisors. So I've got a bit of experience now under my belt for things to look out for, things that you can really easily do in preparation for interviews, and also some of the pitfalls to avoid. I've structured this in a kind of top tips format, which I'll run through with you. But yeah, really happy to answer any questions. Do feel free to add comments or notes to the chat as we go along. And if there's anything we can't get to through today, then we'll obviously follow up afterwards, and I'll share my email address as well, and you're welcome to get in touch. So hopefully you're enjoying the day, and just as a reminder, you can comment on social media, add any posts, and hashtag River Careers 2022 so that we can see whether you're enjoying it and what you're getting out of it today. Just as a reminder, in case you haven't seen it, this is our second Careers in River Conservation event, and we have got on our Unlocking the Severn YouTube channel a previous webinar which we ran last year, and there is another 20-minute workshop from me on there, but if it feels a bit odd that we're jumping right into interviews and you want to go back a step and think, okay, what about searching for jobs and writing the applications to get you to the interview stage in the first place? Don't worry, if you go to that YouTube link, it's all there pre-recorded for you, and at 2 hours 40 you can have another session with me for 20 minutes where I talk you through the tips for where to look for jobs, how to go about the job search, and also how to really shine in your application so that you can get that interview in the first place. And just as a kind of start for 10, something a bit interactive and get us warmed up, I'm really interested to know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident do you feel about job interviews? And I'm aware, yeah, maybe on this call there might be people who've had quite a lot of experience, maybe been knocked back or had some success in job interviews, or failures. And by the way, I think everyone on this call will, who's presenting today, will have had successes and failures in job interviews, myself included. It's not a bad thing to go for a job interview and not get it. There's always something to learn, and you can always, go forward and do great things in the next interview. I'm interested to know, this is not an easy thing at all for anyone. So what the thought of a job interview, does that make you feel good, excited, or maybe a bit queasy? And there might be times that you've done really well and you think, actually, I was really proud of that specific task for those questions, or generally I can keep my cool or not. And if there's some things you'd really like to get better at, hopefully we can help today. So yeah, just as a chance for a bit of reflection before we start on this journey of my tips from my experience. And you're welcome to write any comments in the chat box. And as you do that, I'll review them and have a look through as we kind of get stuck into the workshop. But let's imagine you've got there, you've done your application, and now you are preparing for the interview. Tip number 1. You might be able to guess I used to be a teacher, but always my tips for really any task in life is do your homework. And for interview preparation, this really means reading through the invitation carefully. They will have emailed you, the panel will have emailed you, or the recruiter to invite you to an interview, and that should give you some really important information. And don't forget the basics like the date and the time and the location, but also any instructions they give you. So maybe they'll be setting a task which you need to prepare for, or maybe there'll be a task which will be unseen, so you don't get a chance to prepare, but you'll know that something is coming up, not just the standard questions. They might tell you who's on the interview panel and how long the interview is going to be, so you can just really start to gauge and picture yourself in that position and do all the kind of preparation work to put you in the best position when you go into the interview. And I really recommend sending a prompt reply, and keep it really polite, professional, hopefully to accept. But you might also have any follow-up questions. For example, if they've set you a task, you might just want to check through what the task is and make sure whether you've got any questions on that. And then I get a notebook out or a Word document, or if possible, something physical that you can actually take with you. So if you've got an iPad or even on your phone, but something that you can refer to when you're actually in the interview itself, so you can start noting down your observations and your questions, and do some really good research into the organisation. If there's a particular project that this role is going to be contributing to, find out more about that. Who are the funders? What are the aims or the mission of that organisation or that piece of work? You get an idea of their ethos and their values, and hopefully that will align with your own, and really start thinking about that kind of big picture stuff. If they do give you the names of the interview panel, I suggest looking them up, maybe even adding them on LinkedIn, and finding out about them and their background if you can, and any recent campaigns or things that you could maybe refer to in your interview or in the conversations that you have when you meet them. And it's a really nice chance for you to show that you've done your homework as well when you get to interview. So use it as a chance for a bit of an appraisal of them as an organisation, things that you really like or you're inspired by. And really make sure that you start preparing some questions for them, because I love it when people come to interview and they've got some intelligent questions that show they've done a little bit of background research, not just the kind of generic questions, and that really does make you stand out as a candidate. Tip number 2, have a go at predicting the questions. And this is doesn't need any kind of mind reading techniques or magic. Honestly, I think you'd probably do better than you might expect if you follow this advice. Start with reviewing the role description and the criteria, and pretty much all jobs will give some kind of document which outlines what the job role is and what the criteria are, what the kind of person needs to meet as a minimum in order to be suitable for that job or be qualified for that job. And that is honestly what the panel will be marking you on. So they'll have a crib sheet where their questions link to the criteria they're testing. Does this person fit the criteria? And they'll be scoring you on it. So it's really not rocket science. Once you understand that, and the person behind the desk is going to be using that as a kind of way to assess you, you can then have a go at guessing what questions might come up. definitely start with the essential criteria, but they might also have some extension kind of questions that prompt you to talk about whether you meet some of the desirable criteria, if there are any for that job. So yeah, generally I would advise you should be able to work it out. If not exactly, really have a good estimate and a good go. And then do your preparation for those possible questions, and think about the best examples from your work. But also, if you haven't got work experience yet, not a problem at all. Maybe you've done a little bit of volunteering, even just a few days or one-off volunteering activity will show that you've developed some skills and some experience. Of course, you can use your studies, and we expect that from people, particularly if they're coming into kind of entry-level jobs, graduate positions, or traineeships. And also, we're really understanding that there might not be that many examples yet. So things from your hobbies or from your life experiences are equally good. Talking about maybe events that you've done, charity runs that you've done, or fundraising, or activities with your young family members, for example, to show how good you are at engaging, working as part of a team, being kind of dedicated, working to timelines, things like that. There will be more generic, common criteria which come up again and again in job applications. So you should really get some what I call gold-plated examples for things like teamwork, things like timekeeping, time management, or even things like use of IT. Pretty much all organisations now in a job spec will expect you to be able to use email, Word, spreadsheets and things like that. And I'm really surprised at how poor people's answers are around that. And I think it's because we're just so used to doing it. We use these programs every day, so we're not good at identifying times when we use them really effectively. So yeah, don't forget the ones that seem obvious. Still worth having a really good example for how you can show that that capability. Quite often they'll ask what inspires you about the role or what interested you, so it's really worth coming up with a good answer for that as well. Just again, that shows enthusiasm, shows that you've done a little bit of work around what's going on with the role and what the purpose of it is, and also use that as a chance to demonstrate how good you are for the role as well, and the things that you've got and you can bring that will make this role perfectly suited to you and you perfectly suited to the role. But then do prepare for some tricky questions, and obviously as an interview panel we want you to shine and show yourself in the best light, but we also want to be able to differentiate between candidates. So we might put some harder questions in there to see how people respond, and help people who are really capable, really got the skills to back up what they're saying, shine and stand out. So there might be questions like about your weaknesses, or something went wrong, or a tricky situation and how you handled it. And these can be a little bit disconcerting when you're in an interview. So if you prepare for them, you should be in a good position to then come up with a good answer, whatever the wording of the question. And with these trickier questions, remember, it's always important, if you can, bring it around to something positive. So talking about your weakness, then you can maybe explain what you're doing to work on it, or how you combat that weakness. So for example, if you consider a weakness of yours to be a real perfectionist and a stickler for the detail, and what are you working on to try and overcome that, or try and address that, make sure you don't always get bogged down in the detail, and how do you maybe reach out and work with your colleagues or your teammates, or people that you're studying with, to balance that out and have people on your team that are good at the big picture thinking, so you can really make the most of a team that you're part of, for example.
Alice, can we just go back to the previous slide quickly, just before you finish this one?
Yeah, of course, Aaron. That one.
I think so. It's John who's asking in the chat.
Sorry, John.
Quick screenshot.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, okay.
Good to go. Thank you.
No worries. Feel free to jump in again if I go too quickly. John and Aaron, do feel free to stop me. Okay, so that's predicting the questions. I think that's the last bullet point on that one, if you want to have a quick screenshot. So the last point to make then, if you prepare for the tricky questions, I'd really recommend also thinking creatively and coming up with maybe some more unusual examples that really show you as an individual, and not just more of a generic candidate. So my example here is lots of people do use their dissertation or their studies as their example for time management or heavy workload. course, that's fine, because it is a huge piece of work and you're doing it under pressure to a deadline. So that's absolutely fine if that's the best example you've got. But really think about, okay, what was specific about my dissertation, maybe the field work element, or I had to do some really tricky scheduling and get different people involved. So how can you make your answer really stand out and again, highlight you as a really good candidate? Or it might be that you can think, oh, I could be a bit more creative. And actually, there's a time when I was sailing around the coast that I really had to work well as part of a team, or something like that, that shows something really a bit different and special about you. Tip 3 is my absolute golden rule. They're all golden rules, but this is the one that I think people really fall down on and forget. In an interview, we want to get to know you as a person. It's not a test. It's not trying to work out how much you remember or know about rivers or conservation or any other kind of theme or topic. It's about you, your values, your skills, your achievements and your knowledge. We want you to shine, and we want to get a good sense of whether you'd be a good fit for our team and whether you'd kind of work well in our organisation. So as you're answering, even if it's a hypothetical question, like how would you react in this sort of situation, try and bring your answer around to something positive that demonstrates why you're perfect for the job. So bring in an example to show, yeah, this is how I have handled a similar situation in the past. This is what worked really well. Or even, actually, maybe I'll do it a bit differently based on my reflections of how that thing went when I struggled to meet the deadline because I was getting so bogged down in the detail, for example. But what you want to get to is something that shows you're really good for the job and that you're keen and motivated. And there are a few organisations that actually specify they want a specific format within their job applications, and for interviews it's a really good way to try and make sure you cover all the bases as well, which is sometimes referred to as the CAR format. So that's where you set out a challenge. What was the situation or task or thing that was difficult? You describe the action and really focus on the things you did personally. So even if it was a team effort, be specific about the things, the qualities that you brought as an individual personally to address that challenge. And then the result, the outcome, what changed or what was different or better as a result of that action.
Alice,
Okay.
just going on that, I think there's a question that's come in that might fit in quite well with that.
Yeah, great. It also gives me a chance to pause on my slide. Yeah, go for it.
So it was, would it be good to use the STAR system in interviews? I'm imagining that's similar to the CAR format you've just...
Very good question. Yeah, I was gonna mention the STAR format. And I thought, oh, I won't overcomplicate it, but it's really similar. It's basically the same thing with an extra point to the CAR format. So that's situation, task, action, result. And I think if you can get used to describing your experiences in that format, it can sound a bit formulaic, but honestly, it will really make sure that you're getting analytical rather than being descriptive about just your work history and your life history and everything you've done and everything you're passionate about, which is lovely. But what we really want to know is specifically what you've done in a specific situation and what changed as a result. So if you can get into this formula and get confident using it, then you can start kind of experimenting and using things that are a little bit more personal or different. And yeah, the STAR format, there's really good guidance online if you Google CAR format or STAR format, that will give you, you know, ideas and examples of how to actually use that in an application or an interview. Okay, next tip, preparing for tasks. So quite often interviews will consist of 2 parts or even more. There might be 1 or 2 tasks that they want you to do, and usually this will be competency based, so something that tests your skills and knowledge against the criteria to see whether you would be able to do one of the tasks that would be associated with the job. So I will use Alice as an example for the volunteering officer for Unlocking the Severn. When we did the interviews, we asked candidates to prepare a volunteer recruitment and training plan, and then to present that to us. And usually I will put some kind of task within an interview because it demonstrates communication skills, timekeeping skills, preparation, and also gives a flavour of how somebody would handle some of the real tasks that are associated with the job in a slightly different way to just simple interview questions. So if you do get a task, read the instructions carefully. And quite often it will be a presentation, but there might be other types of tasks, like I mentioned earlier, an unseen test or a role play where you through a scenario, or work on a budget, or create something like a social media post or a campaign plan or something like that, depending on what the role is. So have a look and see what notes or clues they've given you, and whether you can kind of really get an idea of what they're looking for. Remember, they will be also marking you against the criteria for the job, so there shouldn't be any big surprises. It shouldn't be something that's completely unrelated to the job. So really think about, okay, how are they going to be marking me, and what are they looking for with this task? So for example, as I've mentioned, if it's a presentation, they want your skills and experience, but also it'll be a good chance to show that you can communicate well, that you can present information graphically with photographs or images and text in a clear way, and that you can keep to time. If you are giving a presentation, I really recommend keeping it simple and short, easy to read, breaking down into chunks or steps, making it visual, easy to follow, and clear logic. And I really recommend, if there's a task where you need to do some preparation, to actually leave them with a copy of your notes or a copy of your presentation with your name on it clearly, because it's really helpful to look back on when you're then assessing at the end of the day and marking different candidates and comparing them, to just have that as a physical copy, or email it over to them if it's an online interview. Okay, tip number 5, remember, practice makes perfect. So if it is a presentation task, make sure you go through it a number of times to check that you're confident in everything that you're saying, that you don't run over time or run out or go under time. Maybe you need to add more into it, and just get a kind of confident flow with it. Really keep tabs on your timing. That is part of the test. So whether that means you need to have a stopwatch in front of you or have your watch on, just make sure you don't keep track, because yeah, they'll be watching out for that as well, to make sure you can kind of keep to time. You might even consider, cringy as it could be, filming yourself presenting and answering a question. And no one likes to see themselves on film, but actually it is a really good way to get an idea of how you come across, and maybe just think, okay, yeah, I could slow down in my delivery. I don't need to talk so quickly, for example. It just helps you be objective. And if there is someone you trust that you could ask, a friend or family member who could sit through a presentation or ask you those questions that you've come up with that you think might be the interview questions, it really does help. Just build that confidence, so you're not feeling like you're doing it for the first time when you walk into that interview room, particularly if it's a job that you're super passionate about getting. Just give yourself the best chance by doing as much practice as you can. And get someone to score you or score yourself. And if you imagine they're giving you, say, 3 marks or marking out of 5 for each question, be really ruthless with yourself and say, was that answer worth 3 marks? Was it a really good detailed example that really highlighted how suitable I am for that specific criteria? And then don't be afraid to make changes, and that could be really radical, or just tiny tweaks, and think, actually, do you know what, that's not the best example for timekeeping. I'm going to come up with another one, or I've got some better ones in the bag for teamwork. Think about it and make changes to sell yourself as best you can, and then you will get confident with it. Go back and just pause there. On to my last tip now. How are we doing for time, Alice?
Yeah, you've got plenty of time.
Fantastic. I will get interactive in a minute, I promise. On to my last tip is to get organised. So I'm a big fan of Yoga with Adrienne. I don't know if anyone else watches her on YouTube, but I quite often find myself using her phrases in my everyday life. And one of the things she says is set yourself up for greatness. And I think that's never more true than in an interview. There are things that you can do that would just make your life so much easier and make everything run smoothly. So really anticipate that and do everything you can in advance to make it as smooth, enjoyable and confident an experience as you can. So things like knowing the location and the journey time, and then giving yourself extra time, because if you arrive early, you can always just be reading through your application or go somewhere for a coffee and just get yourself settled, so you're not rushing around. It might be an online interview. In the world that we live in now, quite often, even as we're coming out of the pandemic, it's really convenient to be able to do maybe round 1 interviews online before then doing face-to-face meetings. So just check your setup. Have you got a computer in a place that's well lit with good network connection, and don't let your computer run out of charge. Make sure you're not going to be interrupted. Although generally we're quite understanding that if the postman knocks on the door while you're in an interview, it's not the end of the world at all, so don't worry too much about it. but what's in the background? Does it look professional, neat, tidy? Have a drink of water with you so that you can take a sip if you kind of get parched while you're in the interview. Really just set yourself up so it's as nice an environment and enjoyable a process as it can be, and I promise it can be. It's not always how. A lot of people do ask about clothing, and particularly I think for conservation roles, wonder should I be going in my kind of hiking outfits and fleeces and walking boots. I think my advice is to be the best version of yourself that you can and feel confident and like you. So I've had people come to interviews in suits that just look so uncomfortable and hot and just like they didn't want to be there. And maybe that was not just about the outfit they were wearing, but it certainly didn't help. And just because they were wearing a suit, I didn't think, oh, you know, brilliant, they've got a suit on, they're really taking this seriously. So whatever it is that you feel confident in, and if that's jeans and a fleece, then brilliant. But just make sure you feel smart and you look smart, even if it's fairly casual for a conservation role. I would say probably for other roles in other sectors, you need to be more smart than that. But for us at the Severn Rivers Trust, we just want to see really people who are kind of clean, well organised and confident, and that will come through. Think about the night before. Make sure you relax. Don't try not to get too stressed around doing loads and loads of extra work and staying up late to try and do more research, because I don't think that will help. Maybe just one more read through of your application and your notes that you've made for your preparation, and get a good night's sleep. I think that will put you in a much better position than drinking lots of coffee and staying up trying to do extra cramming. And then when the day comes, in a similar vein, do try and have a calm morning, read through your application and your notes again, and just setting yourself up for greatness. Arriving early, keep breathing. And you know what? If you're nervous, it shows you care. And I don't mind people being nervous in an interview at all. But don't be ruled by your nerves. And you can even just say, oh, I'm feeling a bit nervous in an interview. That's fine. It's completely understandable because it's nerve-wracking. But actually, just remember the panel want to get to know you, and they want to get a good idea of who you are and have a conversation with you. So it's not a really scary test. They're just people at the end of the day. So I advise taking your application with you, having your research notes, your notebook, and also pen and paper for questions. And you actually might want to note down questions as they come up, because sometimes they'll have two parts, and you don't want to forget the answer of each part. And you can definitely ask the interview panel to repeat their questions, and just make sure, yeah, you could even make some notes before you answer. Just take your time. It's no rush. Do consider your posture. And think about open body language and eye contact. To again, once you start doing it, even if you're nervous, you'll relax if you open up your posture and body language and make a bit of eye contact, and it will make the dynamic more enjoyable. So do take time to note people's names as you meet them, even people that aren't necessarily on the interview panel. There might be someone that greets you and offers you a cup of tea, or just has an informal chat initially. And that's actually a really good chance to find out more about the organisation, about the people that work there. So show interest, and again, even if you're feeling nervous, act confident and make the most of the opportunity to meet these new people. I started talking about this already, but do take your time before answering as the questions start. And it can be a bit overwhelming, particularly if they're long questions. So don't rush. Don't forget to breathe. And we do want to see the real you and hear what you have to say. So we'd rather you took your time than rushing. If there's a really tough question that comes up, it's tough for a reason. It's because we want to really get into who the different candidates are and try and understand a little bit more about what they'll bring to the table. So don't be put off and don't panic. And do feel free to ask them to repeat a question or check or clarify you've understood it correctly if you need to. That's absolutely fine. As I've said, there might be some two-part questions, so just make a quick note and prepare some notes before answering if that helps you. You might think when you get to the end of an interview and it was fewer questions than you're expecting, and you've saved up your best example and not had a chance to talk about it, actually, could I go back and add a bit more, or elaborate a bit more on a question that I answered already with another example, or just give you a little bit more information about the research that I did as field work, and that's absolutely fine. And remember, this is not just an interview for the interview panel to assess you, but also a chance for you to meet them and think, actually, do I want to work here? Is this an organisation that aligns with my own ethos and values? Is this a team I can see myself being part of? So don't forget, there's a two-way analysis going on there. And I really recommend asking questions, and don't just Google good questions to ask an interview, although that might be a good starting point. Really try and make them your own so that you show some genuine interest. And if there's something that you're really impressed with that organisation, then give that feedback to them. It's really nice to have that good quality feedback, honest flattery, and then make notes on their answers, because that might really help you, again, try and pitch yourself in the job. Make sure you thank them after the interview, and as Dewi mentioned, do follow up and ask for feedback, good and bad, because they will be able to give you some really good pointers. Even if you don't get the interview, they should be able to give you good detailed feedback that will help you in preparation for the next job. I did want to just say quickly before moving on to the more interactive bit, that if you're interviewing for junior roles, which I'm guessing you guys might be if you're starting out in careers in conservation, we have a slightly different, at Severn Rivers Trust, a slightly different way of doing interviews for traineeships, because we understand that people don't necessarily have lots of previous knowledge or experience, and that's fine. So we do try and make those interviews a bit more informal and conversational. Not all organisations will, but what's important there is that we want to know more about you as a person and your values and your kind of aptitude to be able to apply to this role, rather than showing that you can do it all already. So in those kind of interviews, then really get across your motivation and your commitment to the cause of the organisation, and just really demonstrate how keen you are. That's what we're looking for. And that really, then we want to see that willingness to make the extra effort, to learn new skills, be a really good team member and get tasks completed, because at a junior level, again, we're probably going to be throwing things at you where it's just going to be maybe a really tough day of surveying and a lot of time out on site, or travelling distances to get to different places. And we just want to show that, yeah, I'm up for that, I'm really committed and hungry for that learning and those experiences. And that's what we want from a more junior role, rather than somebody who's just able to come in and do it all already. Okay. Still good for time, Alice?
Yeah, still plenty of time.
Excellent. So guessing questions then. Going to make you do it now, and hopefully this will actually prepare you for some real interviews in the future. Here are three what I would call generic essential criteria, which will come up in most jobs in some form or another. So for each of them, if you've got a pen and paper in front of you, guess a question that could be asked at interview to assess a candidate. And if you really want to go for it, you could think there might be one easy or simple question to answer to test that criteria. Or if I was being a really tough interviewee, what tricky wording could I come up with to really put someone through their paces and make them squirm? So have a look. We've got ability to manage workload and prioritise effectively. How might we question a candidate to assess them for that? I've also got a creative approach to problem solving and working well as part of a team. Okay, the wording won't necessarily be the same in every job role, but actually I can pretty much guarantee all professional jobs need this in some way, or form or other. Okay. And once you've done that, hopefully you've got some experiences in your life that you can look back on and make some notes on how you'd actually go about answering those questions. And don't forget, as someone reminded us earlier, you can use the CAR structure, the challenge, action, result, or if you like, the STAR structure, situation, task, action, result, to really show how you meet that criteria or how you'd answer that question. Okay. All right, so ability to manage workload and prioritise effectively. Does anyone feel confident enough? If you'd like to, feel free to share your guest question in the chat box. what do you think someone on an interview panel might say to a candidate in order to test whether they can manage their workload and understand about prioritising? Great, there's some answers coming in. Nice one. How do you handle stress? Yeah, good one. A question about how you manage your time and prioritise during a busy period. They might give you a sort of specific situation to hone you in on your answer. That one, how do you handle stress? That's a tough one, I think. But again, a good chance to elaborate on the work that you're doing for yourself to improve and give an example that shows that you can handle stressful situations. Any others before I go through mine? Feel free to add them in the chat. What do you think a panelist could ask to assess the ability to manage workload? Yeah, I like that one. Is that Jono? Yeah, what techniques do you use to manage your workload? I think that's a good one. It's more not just about you as a person and your kind of attitudes, but actually specifically what you do in order to keep on top of it. Great. Okay, what I've got then here. So talk us through a time when you've managed multiple projects and tasks simultaneously, and that quite often is required in different jobs around prioritising and knowing what to spend your time on when. Maybe an example when you had to work hard to meet a tight deadline, and a lot of jobs will involve multiple and potentially conflicting deadlines, so knowing what order to do things in, again, about prioritisation. You could be asked like a broader question around project management, tools and processes you use. So someone mentioned about techniques that you use to keep things running smoothly. So that would be quite a tricky question, but it could come up in that way. And remember, project could be a dissertation or a piece of research that you've done, or it could be fundraising activity that you did, a sponsored cycle ride or something like that. Project doesn't necessarily need to mean a conservation project. Tools and processes, again, that sounds like really grand, but it might be making lists or using your Outlook calendar or your online calendar to schedule your workload and appointments. So just don't be put off by words that sound fancy or like kind of business jargon. Just really consider your own experiences. They are valuable, and you will have some examples if you just take your time. How do you know whether your workload is on track? Another question that could come up. And again, yeah, just thinking back through the examples that you've got from your work history or your experiences studying, traveling, hobbies, things like that, where you've had a chunk of work to do or lots of different tasks to do, and how you keep things going. Okay. So the next one, working well as part of a team. Same question. Can you think what questions might come up in an interview to assess whether someone can work well as part of a team? Give you a minute to think about it. And if you're thinking about it and you've got your ideas and suggestions, then remember the next stage is to think about your own experiences and what your best examples are. It's always helpful to be thinking about this and noting down the ideas that come to you. Yeah, nice one, Elspeth. What role do you normally take on in a team? It's really good to know yourself, and if you haven't done any of those, I'm a bit obsessed with them, but you know those personality tests, and there's different ones. Some of them may be better than others, so do your research and check you're doing a legitimate one, but there are some really good ones out there to help you understand more about yourself and your personality. And that can really help in terms of describing your tendencies, or how you respond to stressful situations, or team dynamics and things like that. And then again, they can give you good action points or things to try, or ways to address some of the more negative situations that might come up, or stresses for your personality type. So I've actually found that really useful, and it can then translate into your job interviews, and also just your world of work and personal lives as well, just to help understand a bit more about yourself and come up with those ways to overcome those difficult situations. Good one about weaknesses when working in a team. Yeah, that could come up, and it's really good again to just know yourself well and come up with those examples which are honest, but also that you can turn around to show that you're working on it, or that you know yourself well, but it wouldn't be a detriment to this job because you've got good coping strategies and methods. Oh, Alex, your one's really interesting. So what skills are key to working well in a team? And sometimes those questions do come up where it's more like generic. It's not asking you about you and yourself and your experiences. And I'd really say that in those situations, give your generic answer about the kind of show, what you care about in teamwork and your assessment of it. But then if you can, even though it's not asking you for a specific example, add a little car example on there where you describe a challenge, an action and a result that is very specific to you, because again, it will just bump up your marks and show that you're really thinking about how to demonstrate your suitability for the role, rather than just talking more generic terms. Really nice ideas, guys. It's really I think your suggestions are maybe a bit better than mine. It's really nice to see your suggestions in the chat. So the ones I came up with: what experience do you have as working in a professional team? Pretty simple. Again, I put the word professional in there, makes it a bit trickier, but if you don't have any examples from the world of work and you haven't got professional experience, don't be put off. Just give an example of really good teamwork from another example in your life, whether that's through a sports team that you're part of, or something where you are organizing something with friends or family, but show how those aptitudes and those skills that you brought would lend themselves to you being able to apply them in a professional context. How would you describe your role in a team? Someone's already basically said that, but a really good one to get to know yourself and get confident describing yourself. It might be, again, a more specific example, time when you supported a colleague to do something together, or shared outcome. And we always want to know what specifically you contributed. Please don't end up just describing a project that you were in a team doing and then just say, we did this, we did that, because that really is hard to assess, to show exactly what you as a person brought. So that's the trick with teamwork questions, is showing your own aptitudes and your own contributions. This one's pretty much come up already as well. What do you think makes a good team? We've got time for one more, Alice, or shall I stop there?
You've got a couple of minutes, just a couple of minutes.
Okay, let me just double check. This is it. This is the last one. Okay, so creative approach to problem solving. Any thoughts on what questions could come up for a problem solving assessment? I think pretty much every job that you'll ever apply for will need some kind of element of problem solving. Really interesting. How do you solve a problem with instructions? Did you mean without instructions, or did you mean with instructions? I'm interested, because I think that you could end up with really different answers. You would end up with really different answers. Yeah, that makes sense. Hopefully your answer to with instructions will be to follow the instructions carefully. But sometimes we do want to show or get out of a candidate whether they can follow instructions and work well under supervision, because particularly for trainee roles, it's a really important part of the job. We don't want you going off and just kind of making it up yourself, or not checking in, not getting feedback. So Yeah, I do laugh about that instruction one, but actually initially, particularly in any role, you will really need to know how to get feedback, how to check in, make sure you're doing the job as expected, or whether you can make any improvements. But without instructions, that would be a really interesting question as well. How would they go about it if they were kind of left to their own devices? And that would really be where the problem solving came in. What else is coming in? Yeah, from Emma, can you describe an instance where typical problem solving channels are not available? Yeah, what you do to solve the issue. That's a tough one, I would say, but would get some really interesting answers around. It's almost a time when something went wrong. Yeah, maybe you didn't have a supervisor that you could call, or someone wasn't available, or you were left in a situation that you had to think on your feet. That's a good question, and I think I'm feeling a little bit stressed thinking about how I would answer that. So I think you get some good answers from there. Yeah, really about how people kind of manage changing environments and difficult environments where problems come up unexpectedly. See what I've put then. So I know we haven't got long left. Yeah, I think time you had to think creatively to find a solution to a problem. Not necessarily the most imaginative question, but there we go. It would test that criteria. And what do you do if a problem arises at work? Again, not particularly imaginative, but we're really asking for that situation where something happened, something went wrong, or there was an issue, and how did you respond? What's been one of the biggest challenges in your life, and how have you overcome it? That's much bigger and broader, and that could encompass all kinds of different scenarios. So yeah, that'll be us wanting to get to know you, more about you as a person. Talk us through a time when you had to think on your feet to solve a problem, and what did this experience teach you? And yeah, my advice then is to take this approach to all of your criteria, all of your points that you're going to be tested on to assess whether you are suitable for this role. Have a go, make up some questions, and then have a go at noting down your answers and practicing them. And hopefully that will put you in a really good position for your next interview. And I'd love to hear if anyone does, as a result of this, get an interview and have success in their job interviews. And hopefully this helps. So please give us feedback and let us know if it does. Really happy to take any final comments or questions. And if you want to share in the chat box, I'd love to hear if this has been useful, anything you've learned or any suggested changes. And yeah, hopefully wishing you all the best for your next interviews and applications and your future careers.
We've just got one question that I can see in at the moment, Alice, which is it okay to ask the interviewer if you've answered the question, or to ask if they would like you to elaborate further?
Definitely, yeah. Don't be afraid to be a bit conversational in an interview, because I think it kind of breaks down the barrier of it feeling very formal. And I think that will reassure you as well, just to think, did I understand that right? And did I answer it right? And sometimes I've been in the situation in an interview where I've kind of ended up maybe going off on a tangent or waffling a bit, and then suddenly feeling self-conscious, like, oh, I'm not sure if I've answered this correctly. And it's so much better just to pause and double check with them, and they will be able to point you in the right direction if you may be veering off on a slightly different track.
Okay, there's just another one that's come in. Is how do we answer if they ask on salary expectation? Do we answer with a number?
Whoa, good question. So probably my answer is going to be different to someone in a kind of business or executive workshop talking about interviews, because I would say don't be put under any pressure on salary expectations. Don't feel like you're on the spot and you've got to answer straight away. I would say, I mean, maybe you've got a number in mind and you feel confident to just go in there with it, but I certainly wouldn't expect anybody to do that in an interview, and that you'd be completely fine just to say, oh, I'm just going to give it some thought and come back to them in an email or a follow-up phone call. And yeah, with a number, I guess, if you've got a number in mind, then do give it to them. But if not, see what their offer is. And there is usually a bit of negotiation, probably less so with junior roles, I would say, and it's usually once people have got that experience and those kind of other previous roles under their belt that they can then use as a bit of bargaining to say, actually, I've got these extra qualifications which I think put me in a good position, or I've managed a team or done extra over and above to show I meet the more than the essential and desirable criteria. So there's a bit of negotiation there. So I don't know what stage you're at in your career, but usually for the entry level, I don't think you'd be likely to be put in that position. And certainly in an interview, I wouldn't expect to try and have that negotiation. It's more about just getting to know each other initially. And then those kind of conversations can happen when you get down to hopefully the job offer.
Cool. Right, we have got one more in, but if anybody else has got any other questions for Alice regarding interviews, if you want to put them in the chat, we'll actually come back to those in the Q&A session if that's all right. We need to move on to the next one now.
Yeah, brilliant.
But feel free to add any other questions in there and we'll come back to them. So the next talk we're going to have is from Corinne and Aaron regarding the benefits of doing an apprenticeship. So Aaron, you should have permission to share. I think I'll add you as well, Corinne, but I think Aaron is doing the sharing.
Thanks, Alice.
Hello everyone, yeah, my name's Aaron. I'm the Waterways Environment Apprentice on the Unlocking the Severn project. I'm just going to move myself over there quickly. So yeah, Corinne and I are here to talk about apprenticeships in the river conservation. Let's begin. So a bit about who we are first. So as I said, my name's Aaron. I've always loved being outdoors. I'm absolutely fascinated by the natural world. I remember being a kid and just always being outdoors, going fishing, collecting ants and stuff in the garden. Yeah, fascinated. I have a few different hobbies, sports, football, skateboarding, but generally as long as I'm outside, I'm happy. I studied geography at the University of Portsmouth. I finished my degree in lockdown, as I'm sure some of you have experienced the pressures of COVID and studying. Yeah, it's a challenge. And yeah, I focus on kind of biodiversity and sustainability, which geography allowed me to explore those passions, which is brilliant. My previous job experience before doing the apprenticeship was I did lifeguarding for 5 years. I did that full-time and part-time. And I did a bit of landscaping as well, which was kind of just an infill job after finishing my degree and coming into COVID. And I also did some volunteering after that, which was just at my local park. I walked down there throughout lockdown. It was one of my places to escape, and it was a beautiful place. And I thought, I just got to get down there and help out. And I think it really helped me out in terms of getting the role that I have at the moment. Yeah, Corinne, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Corinne and I'm the Social Media and Events Apprentice for Unlocking the Severn. Now, like Aaron, I mean, it goes without saying really, I'm interested in conservation, particularly for me, marine and freshwater species. So I spent a lot of time when I was younger scuba diving in some really murky lakes and around the coast. So I became quite fascinated with underwater life. And this led me on to studying geography at Durham University. And then I went on to do my master's in oceanography at Southampton. I've also got a real love of the arts, so I enjoy practically anything creative. So it's really great with my job that I can combine conservation with also my creativity in this job role. In terms of my background, I've done lots of different part-time jobs, but this is sort of my first step into the conservation sector. Thanks, Aaron.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot I was doing that.
I know Jason covered a little bit about Unlocking the Severn a little bit earlier today, but just a background, it's a river conservation and community engagement project. So the project has designed and built these big concrete structures on the River Severn, these fish passes, and they offer migratory fish another route around the weirs. So weirs create a barrier on the river that not all fish can get past, and this means that they can't access the upper reaches of the river for spawning. So these fish passes, like you can see in the picture, offer another route around the weir. We've also got a really unique and exciting underwater viewing window at one of our fish passes in Worcester. So people can go down and see wild fish swimming past the structure, and that's the photo in the top of the image there. We've seen 23 species of fish through the window so far, and we've also seen an otter who also enjoys zipping through the pass as well. So it's a really cool project and it's super fun to be involved with. Thanks, Aaron.
So good. I'm just going to touch in, and before I go on to the next slide, volunteers are basically a huge part, being Canal Rivers Trust, Severn Rivers Trust, the different partners. volunteers are a huge part of this, and that's where kind of my role comes into it. So my apprenticeship is Waterways Environment Apprentice, focusing on volunteering. So the learning is kind of a mixture of the knowledge and the skills and necessary behaviours that you need to be working in the waterways environment. The knowledge kind of covers health and safety, responding to flood events, business skills and project management. So really useful knowledge in there. The skills and behaviours are a lot more practical. So these are kind of tracked by your apprenticeship assessor coming down, and he just has a little notebook and takes notes of you running a task or doing a task yourself. So yeah, it's really hands-on and brilliant. And that's kind of where the off-the-job training comes in as well. So that's a 20% of your time has to be spent doing the off-the-job hours in your 18 months of the 18 months of the apprenticeship. And this is basically learning or doing something new during work hours. So it can be literally anything from learning a new skill, like doing hedge laying, or it can be a new kind of conversation you have with someone when you learn a new fact. There's lots of different things it can be. And this leads nicely into the journal. The journal is where you kind of keep a track of your off-the-job hours, but I kind of use it personally just to keep a note of what I get up to. There's such a variety of tasks and different things that it's just good to look back and see what we've done, really. But it all kind of leads into the endpoint assessment, which is where you actually get your qualification from. The previous stuff is just keeping track, making sure you're up to date. But the endpoint assessment is where, yeah, you pass or fail. And it takes place over a few months, consists of 50 multiple choice questions to do the knowledge side of things, and then a professional discussion, which talks through kind of your journal and a project you've led along the way. And then finally, there's 2 assessments of you leading a task with volunteers and then you doing a task yourself. So it's just making sure you're doing it in a safe way. It's all planned and prepared in the best way possible. So yeah, at the end of the day, if you pass, you can get a qualification that's equivalent of 3 A levels, which is brilliant. Always good to have under your belt, and the practical skills that you get along with it is amazing as well. So yeah, if you get a distinction, you become a CIWEM technician. So that's the Chartered Institute of Water and Environment Management, which just sounds pretty cool. I don't really know what it means, but it sounds pretty good. So yeah, and just a week in my life, really. So Monday I kind of block out as apprenticeship time, and this can be online learning, as you can see in the top left hand picture. Excuse the mustache, it was Movember. Yeah, so learning online or putting stuff in my journal, then also the site visits and calls, that's quite an important aspect of it. But I think that's about 20%, isn't it, of your time is from Monday to Friday is taken out with the apprenticeship, which is good. Most of my other role is just supervising volunteers. So Alice runs a Severn Conservation Task Force, which does conservation tasks up the River Severn in Worcestershire, Shropshire and Gloucestershire. So I help supervise that, really. So kind of Alice's thing, but I'm just there to help out. But my main responsibilities is working with the green team. So these are the lovely people, volunteers in the top right hand picture and the middle left. So they work on Diglis Island, and we have a whole range of different areas to focus on. So we've got the wildflower meadow, as you can see in the top right. There's woodland and obviously the river either side, orchard, and there's just a lot of opportunity to create a really nice and biodiverse, amazing area on this small little island in Worcester. So yeah, as well as those, there's the fish pass, which Corin mentioned, has a viewing window which you can see into the river, which is incredible, but that window gets incredibly dirty. So I've organised a volunteer group to get people in to come in and clean the window, and it's a great laugh. Amazing to get in there as well. So the middle picture on the right hand side is a few of the volunteers that got in, and sometimes there's some monitoring going on with the Environment Agency, or there's people doing different like maintenance in there. So there's always stuff happening when the pass gets drained down, which is really cool. But the kind of background work that goes into it, there's the safe systems of work. So just ensuring that what's happening is safe and that the tools and materials are there for the task to take place. and also just finding tasks to do. That's kind of half the battle, is seeing what there needs to be done and if it's the appropriate season for it to be done. Yeah, and coordinating them on the day, that's an interesting thing to try and figure out, is trying to find the balance of managing people that are giving up their own time selflessly. So you can't really say, oh, well, I'm your manager, you must do this. You've obviously got to develop quite a rapport and just understand that they're doing things out of the kindness of their hearts. And it is, yeah, it's brilliant. So alongside that, there's not a lot of time, but there's time for kind of project work, which is something that I've taken on myself. The San Martin box is quite a structure that I've kind of led as my first project, so a bit of project managing, and that's the bottom right hand picture. That took some thinking on my part. It was a coordination between a local environmental group and the RSPB, who came to me with the idea, and it was a good practice for me to see what goes into doing a small project like this. To me it was huge, but to see, say, Jason earlier, who's been a program director on a £20 million project, for me to do a small thing like this is, yeah, just to see into the world is crazy. But then there's also a lot of time to do the external training, hedge laying, brush cutter, chainsaw. This is the place to learn it. So yes, it's amazing. I'll pass over to Corin, I think. There we go.
Thanks, Erin. Yeah, so I'm just going to cover what my job role kind of involves, and then I'll move into my apprenticeship and how that all fits together. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes in conservation. So I'm the social media and events apprentice, and my role is kind of split in two. It's split between communications and events. So with comms, my main role, I suppose, is running the social media channels. So that's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I also update and write copy for the website. I put together a monthly newsletter, and then lots of smaller roles like monitoring our inbox and our YouTube channel. With events, it's more kind of a mixture of in-person and online events. So I will help to organise and attend events such as open days. We do a lot of community engagement as well, lots of engagement with school groups. So I'll be there to facilitate sort of what's happening with those. And obviously, thanks to the pandemic, a lot of our events have taken place online over the last few years. So since I started on the project, I've organised some online webinars, and I've also organised a documentary screening online as well. And then I communicate sort of the promotion of these on social media and on our website. Thanks, Erin. Next slide. But I've had lots of really cool experiences as well that come from being part of a huge conservation effort. So the photo on the top left, the really attractive photo of me in safety gear, that was me inside Diglis and Holt Fish Pass. So I've been able to sort of see the project from a fish's perspective, I suppose. And like Erin says, there's always lots of activity going on with the scientists. I've learned a lot about scientific monitoring from the project as well. Which is really cool with my background in geography. So I've learned how cameras, audio equipment, and citizen science are all used to monitor fish populations. And the photo on the bottom left is taken from a scientific monitoring meeting that I sat in on, which was really cool. I've met royalty as well, which is a bit of a crazy thing to say as part of the job. But we had Princess Anne come and open the fish pass, which was really exciting. So lots of really cool things to get involved with. Every day is slightly different. You never really know what's going to happen with Unlocking the Severn, but it's a really cool project to be involved with. And if Erin could move on to the next slide, I'll just chat about the apprenticeship. Thank you. So I also take 1 day a week for my apprenticeship study. For me, I usually do it on a Friday. I like to get all the sort of job specific stuff done in the week and then focus on my apprenticeship for the weekend. But unlike Erin, my apprenticeship is more run through an online training company. So all of my work takes place online. I have monthly meetings with my supervisor, and she sets me work to complete, things like assignments, reports, and different things for the apprenticeship. I'm also currently working on my online portfolio. So this is for me a website to show the projects I'm working on and also the skills that I've gained. And I'll present this and my assignments during my endpoint assessment, which is our final assessment for the apprenticeship. Thanks, Erin.
it doesn't. Oh, there we go. So yeah, just a bit about, well, from my perspective, the benefits of doing an apprenticeship. I think it's definitely a foot in the door for a career in conservation. I've really struggled coming out of lockdown with a degree and thinking I've done this really amazing thing. Now it's time to use it. It was just impossible to find a job that wasn't asking for a certain number of years experience. And I think this is my way. And so I feel very, very blessed to have found it, really. I've learned and developed so many skills, especially employability skills. Things I mentioned earlier, it's kind of managing volunteers, the risk assessment writing, all very practical and useful things. There's also like LANTRA qualifications which come with it, winching, first aid at work, and the one I'm most excited for is 4x4 off-road driving, which I haven't done yet, but I think it's going to be fun. Yeah, the conservation techniques is something that I couldn't really find anywhere. There's not really a YouTube video for revetment building, but thankfully I went up and met Dewey in North Wales, and he taught me the techniques to do it. So there's always things or opportunities to learn these things. Leaky dams as well, that was an interesting one. And amazingly, after all the flooding, they are still in place at the Severn Valley Country Park. Yeah, so a wide variety of tasks and responsibilities, as I've said just before, mentioned so many different things. And I think personally for myself, I feel a lot more confident in managing general situations that I might not have come across before, because I've tackled such a variety of things beforehand. So no task is too big when you've done so many different things, and you kind of piece together the skills from doing the other ones to make this one easier, if that makes sense. And there's a lot of opportunities for further development. As I said about the external training, and there's in-house training with Canal and River Trust, plenty of things to be doing. Yeah, I'll pass over to Corinne for the last bit.
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of echo what Erin said. I know, like a lot of you, I found it really hard to kickstart my career in conservation. I think that was probably compounded by the pandemic as well. But I found this apprenticeship, I think it was through environment jobs, and I just thought was right up my street. Combined all the things I was interested in. But my one thing that sort of slightly put me off before applying was that it was an apprenticeship. I thought, well, you know, I've done a degree. Is it going to be a step down in a way? But honestly, I couldn't have been more wrong. I've learned so much from both conservation and marketing sectors that I can apply to a range of jobs. I wouldn't worry about taking that sort of step that you might think is a step down to then kickstart your journey on the conservation sort of career ladder, I suppose. And although I had the academic knowledge, the apprenticeship really filled the gaps for my industry knowledge and work experience. So in that sense, honestly, it's been vital so far. You've got the opportunity to tailor your interests, like Erin said. So I've been able to take online courses in topics I'm interested in. And also I've been able to produce a portfolio that reflects my personal skill set as well. Something that I've learned is really important is how you sort of market yourself professionally, particularly online. So I've learned to use platforms such as LinkedIn and Twitter to show off my skills, to show what I'm learning and what I've got involved in. And I think if I was to give advice, if you think it's necessary for you, I'd start building an online presence. So it's a great way of growing your network and also promoting your skills. And it's something you can give employers to show, you know, that you've done some work, you've done some exciting things, you've managed a project, things like that. If you've got a way to sort of present it online, is a really good skill. As I said, I'll have my own website and portfolio when I finish. So this is something that I can demonstrate to employers when I apply for jobs in the future. So yeah, to sum up, I really, really recommend an apprenticeship if you're starting a journey. And I hope that Erin and I have shown you some of the real benefits that it can provide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both. So we've got a couple of quick questions for you. The first being, would you be able to do an apprenticeship alongside a university degree? So for example, during a year in industry?
Interesting. I personally, well, I did it after my degree. I think because I'm employed full-time by the Canal River Trust, it comes as part of the job. So I wouldn't have personally had time to do it with the degree. I haven't done a year in industry, so I'm not entirely familiar on how that works. So yeah, I'm not sure. Erin, do you have anything?
Yeah, I'm much the same. I didn't get to do a year in industry, so as much as I'd like to answer it, I don't think I can.
Both of your apprenticeships are 18 months, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes,
So you'll probably find it might be a bit long to do alongside a degree, but it's certainly something you can look at doing after. So another one is, do you need to have a degree in order to do an apprenticeship?
No, as far as I'm aware, no, you don't at all. That wasn't one of the requirements on the application that I filled in. It was just something that I had, you know, as extra. But yeah, I'd say you don't at all have to have a degree to do an apprenticeship.
Okay.
I think the minimum requirements for me were GCSEs, so it's probably was beneficial in terms of applying to have a degree, but I don't think it was entirely necessary.
Okay, and one that maybe Alice could help out with is, do we know, are apprenticeships open to international students? Don't know whether you could answer that, Alice, or whether that's something we need to look into and come back on. Oh, not sure Alice is still there. We'll come back to you on that one, Azalea, and we'll double check and we'll come back. Another one is, oh, they're flying in for you guys. Were there any resources that helped you find an apprenticeship?
Interesting. Sorry, could you repeat that to me, Alice?
Were there any specific resources that helped you find the apprenticeship?
Oh, I see, find. Well, I found mine through environment jobs. So I would say, you know, putting yourself on those mailing lists is a really useful one. Maybe if you're sort of at uni or at college asking around, particularly in your department, I think a lot of people will be quite useful pointing you to different places to look. Yeah, that's how I would answer that question.
Cool.
Potentially looking on, if there's a certain company that you know might have certain characteristics or an ethos that you like, just keeping up to date on their website, because they seem to post a lot, especially Canal Rivers Trust. All of their opportunities go live there, and you probably see it first there. Yeah, that's what I have to say.
Cool. And then just one final one we've had in for you guys is, how much do you now use what you learned on your degree?
For me, I've actually learned so many new things on this. I don't use my degree so much in terms of the subject knowledge that I've learned. I would use it in terms of the practical skills, like, you know, for example, Excel, how to manage data and things like that. But yeah, for me, I've actually developed a whole new skill set. So in a way, for me, they're completely different.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd say much the same, really. The knowledge side of things, I try to revisit what I learned at uni every now and again, and I think the kind of conservation biogeography side of things comes into play quite often. But other than that, yeah, it's just the transferable skills. Report writing is coming in really useful for, say, writing a risk assessment and method statement, just to make it sound legit, basically.
Okay, right, there are a couple more that have come in, but what I'm going to do is we'll go to the next talk, and we'll come back to your Charlotte and Freya's questions in the Q&A session after, if that's all right. So the next one we've got is from Mark. So it's going to be a bit of a kind of introduction and around doing further study in this sort of sector, so in river conservation, particularly in doing a PhD. So Mark, you should have permission now if you wanted to share any slides, or if you just want to talk, it's up to you.
Yeah, I saw that pop up, being a co-host, so let's see if I can do this. Give me a minute here. It's not showing up. Here we go. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, nice. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about doing a PhD related to river conservation. My name is Mark Yeldham, and I'm at Bournemouth University, and I'll just oh, that's not working. Firstly, I'll just go through what I'm going to talk about. So I'll talk about what I'm actually studying. Then I'll go into sort of a little bit of detail about how I'm studying it. But then I'll focus on how I got into doing a PhD, what I get out of doing a PhD, and then some of the challenges. And then obviously I'll answer some questions at the end, because I'm sure I won't cover anywhere near enough. So firstly, what am I studying? Well, my thesis title is going to be what you see on the screen there. So it's measuring the migratory and ecological responses of a threatened anadromous fish to river reconnection, Thwaite shad, Alocephalax in the River Severn. And that's a picture of a Thwaite shad at the bottom there. Now, some of those words might not mean an awful lot to people, so I'll just sort of cover what I'm doing. So an anadromous fish is a fish that migrates from the ocean into the river to breed. So that's a fish that sort of spends the majority of its life out in the sea, and then in the spring it comes into the river to breed. And there are issues facing these fish in the river. So that can be pollution in the river, overfishing, or artificial barriers. And that's what my degree really focuses on. So here's a picture of the Vezins Dam in France. And as you can see, it goes all the way across the river. It's a hydropower plant, and it basically stops any fish getting upstream. So how can we actually remedy this issue of fish getting upstream? Well, we can remove the barriers, and that's the same dam, but completely removed, or in the process of being completely removed anyway. But this is often not possible due to costs. It's pretty expensive to remove them, but also they're quite often actually being used. So whether it's for navigation or irrigation or hydropower plants. So we might have to do something different. So we might have to modify the barriers to try and allow fish over them a bit easier, or we build fish passes to allow the fish around them. So the Unlocking the Severn project, I'm sure you've heard about a lot today. So it's that EU Life and Heritage Lottery funded project to build fish passes and modify weirs on the River Severn and its tributary, the River Team. So there's a picture here. So you've got the 4 fish passes on the River Severn, and then the 2 dams that have been modified, either partially removed or modified to have a lower gradient to allow fish up them. And then you've got a picture of the designs of each fish pass as well. So that's what I'm looking at. So what I'm looking at is using acoustic telemetry. So those are individually coded transmitters that we insert into each fish, so into the shad, and they send out a little signal every minute or so, which is individual to each fish, so we can identify each fish from that code. But obviously you need to actually hear that transmission to actually identify it. So here's the tag. So this big one on top is the acoustic transmitter. So that sends out this pulse every minute or so. And the smaller tag below it, that's a pit tag. It's kind of like a microchip you'd get in your cat or your dog. And we use that for other things. So we can actually track a fish through the fish pass using this tag rather than the acoustic tag. But to identify the fish within the river, we need to place these acoustic receivers within the river. And here's a picture of an acoustic receiver. It's a hydrophone, basically. So it hears the sound of this of this transmitter, and it can basically tell you that the fish that's tag has sent out that signal is within, say, about 200 meters of that receiver. And then if we place receivers all along the river, like on the picture on the right on the map, that's the array of receivers we had last year. We can actually track each fish throughout the river, and we can basically see where it is and how long it stays in each part, where it goes, what it does. And so how can we actually use that data to look at how these fish passes and weir modifications are working? Well, we can actually compare sort of before and after the river restoration. So what the majority of fish do prior to these fish passes being put in, and then what the majority do afterwards. But also these tags last for up to 3 years. So during the actual process of the fish passes being built and opened, individual fish will have experienced the river before and after being opening. So we can compare it in that sort of scale as well. And then for the fish passes further upstream, where the fish would never have got there prior to the lowest fish pass being opened, we can just look at how they respond, how they behave and move around the fish pass compared to just in the unobstructed open reach below it. And that'll give us an idea of actually how well these fish passes work. So how did I actually get into doing a degree? Well, I did a qualification, I did a master's in zoology at Sheffield University. Now that was an integrated master's, so it was a 4-year master's rather than doing a bachelor's and then a 1-year master's. I did that in 2015. I finished that in 2015, but I only started my PhD last year, so it's sort of almost 6 years between finishing the master's and starting the PhD. So I've obviously done some things between now and then. I actually finished my master's and never wanted to get into research or academia ever again. I feel like that was really a little bit of burnout from 4 years of studying, and so I went off, did a little bit of traveling, and then came back and realized that, you know, I really like research and I'd really want to get back into it. So I started off doing a bit of volunteering. So I lived back over in Lincolnshire at the time, and I did a bit of volunteering for the Lincolnshire Chalk Streams project, and I was doing freshwater invertebrate surveys and cataloguing species for that. I was also doing sort of vegetation clearance, just general manual labour, and I was also looking for a lot of camera trap footage and identifying species and cataloguing that. Then after that, I got a job as a research assistant for the University of York, and that was just a 3-month summer sort of placement studying butterflies up in northern Britain. So up in the Lake District in Scotland, I was out all the time studying butterflies, and that's where this picture comes from. Some of the hazards of field work, I managed to slice my hand open on a rock and then I fell into a bog on that particular day. But I've still got a smile on my face, as you can see. So I did that 3-month placement, and then the following year I got another job as a research assistant, this time for the RSPB, and that was actually building on what I'd done the year before, studying butterflies. So it was more specifically looking at one species of butterfly I had studied in the previous year, and that's the mountain ringlet butterfly. So I was up in the Lake District, sort of on my hands and knees on the tops of the hills looking for egg-laying females, which was good fun, apart from when it was chucking it down with rain, which was almost all the time. So after that, I got a lot of field research work with that. I then decided that I actually needed something a bit more permanent. I couldn't just do 3 months at a time during the summer and then go back to lifeguarding the rest of the year. So I ended up with a job with the Environment Agency, a bit of a change from butterfly research, but yeah, through my work volunteering from the Lincolnshire Chalk Streams project, really helped me getting that. So I was in the sampling and collection team, so a lot of water quality sampling, but also I did the freshwater invertebrate sampling, and as well as that, electrofishing surveys, which really sort of I really enjoyed. They're great fun, and it really got me to appreciate sort of the freshwater fish of the United Kingdom. But then, you know, after that, I did that for over a year. I was looking for other things to sort of step up a level, and I couldn't find anything. I eventually went traveling again for another few months, went over to Australia, and then I came back and I moved into the private sector. So I worked as an assistant freshwater ecologist at an environmental consultancy. So again, I was doing sort of water sampling, invertebrate surveys, and the odd electrofishing survey. But I realized I really wanted to do research, and I also wanted to do more work with fish rather than just water quality. so further details on how I actually got into doing a PhD. Well, firstly, I get experience, and everything I did, including my university degree, my volunteering, all of those jobs, they all gave me different skills and different experiences that helped in getting the degree. So that's the biggest thing, I think. But then you actually have to find a degree. So I just kept looking and looking on, there's a great website called findaphd.com, and that advertises PhDs that are funded, that are already sort of, the project is vaguely designed. So that's a good way to find something. And then once you've seen something that you actually like, and you've got to make sure that you really like the look of it, because there's no point in applying for a PhD you're not going to be fully committed to. But once you found it, just reach out to the supervisor or potential supervisor, send them an email, because part of the reason I got my degree was I sent an email, didn't hear back for a while. Turned out I hadn't actually been listed for an interview, but then the PhD actually broke down, so it didn't happen. But then it was then re-advertised at a different institution. So then, because I'd followed up about this PhD, the supervisor actually contacted me to say, look, we're re-advertising it, I think you should apply. So I think contacting these supervisors and following up, but not harassing, obviously, is a good way to sort of stick in the mind of a potential supervisor. And when you're applying, make sure you do your research on the actual PhD, the project, and some of the papers that the supervisors had written, or usually they give you some suggested reading at the bottom of the advert. So have a look on Google Scholar, try and have a little read around the subject, especially when you're actually applying and sort of writing your application. They're quite tedious sometimes, and you need to know what you're talking about. Then obviously I know you've already heard about interviews, but make sure you prepare for your interview. I had a few interviews for different PhDs, which, to be honest, went pretty badly because I hadn't done enough preparation. And part of it was to do with the fact that, I wasn't actually as interested in the project as I thought I was. But you really need to prepare, do your research, prepare for the interview. And then if you get an interview, make sure you sell yourself, because that was another reason I never really sort of told the full story about what I'd done and the full potential that I had. So you've got to make sure people know that. And then what will I actually get out of doing the degree? Well, I gain a lot of scientific skills, so hopefully I'll become a more rounded researcher. So skills in telemetry, so the tracking of the fish, lots of data analysis. When I was doing my first degree, I did the odd course on data analysis, but I never really got into the nitty-gritty details of it. But now I'm basically teaching myself R coding and getting into all the data analysis details, scientific writing and scientific communication. I learned that as well. And then there's also more transferable skills that'll sort of translate to any job. So time management skills, organizational skills, problem solving, presenting. Hopefully I'll get better at that as the degree goes on. And then also you meet loads of people while you're doing the degree. So there's a lot of networking opportunities, and then hopefully it'll improve my job prospects at the end of it. So what are some of the challenges that I'm facing? Well, actually doing a PhD is very hard and it can be quite stressful. But everyone would do it if it wasn't hard, so there'd be no point in it. Quite often you end up doing quite long hours with very little pay. You get a stipend usually, which it covers some living costs, but it's not a huge amount of money, and you might have stepped back from a higher paid job to actually do a degree, and you're sort of committing 37 hours plus definitely to doing it. So yeah, you're not getting a huge amount of pay. There's a relatively long time commitment, so 3+ years. Mine's a 3-year PhD, but you can get 4-year. If you go over to America or something, it's slightly different, but they seem to do a PhD for almost their entire lives. Another challenge, you only get out what you put into the degree. So if you're working in a job, not to say you should do it, but if you're a bit lazy, you know, it's going to harm your employer probably more than it harms you, unless of course they sack you. Whereas doing a PhD, the main person you're harming by sort of not doing the work is yourself, because at the end of the day, you'll do 3 years and you won't have an awful lot to show for it. So yeah, you've really got to work quite hard. Sometimes you can lack motivation, and then sometimes you can actually feel like your friends are progressing more than you. So as I said, it was 6 years between finishing my first degree and starting my PhD. So a lot of my friends are off doing high-powered jobs now. A lot of people who've done PhDs did them earlier and they've already finished them. So sometimes it can just feel a bit, you know, draining with sitting there still in education years later. So how do you cope? How do I cope with some of these challenges? Well, firstly, as I've mentioned before, you need to be really passionate about the subject that you're doing. So there's no point in doing a PhD in something that it's going to disinterest you in a couple of years' time. You've got to really want to do it. You need to build a decent support network. So that's like your supervisors, your friends, your family, other people who are doing a PhD sort of around the same time as you, and you need to actually like talk to them about any problems, about how you're getting on. Also, you need to make time for other things. So don't just sit there doing your degree constantly 24/7. So like I try not to do any work at the weekends. You know, I might occasionally have to, especially during the field season. But you know, I play hockey, I play a little bit of music as well. So you've really got to have that work-life balance, which sometimes while doing a PhD can sort of tip a bit over onto the work side. And then, as I mentioned about, you know, feeling a bit left behind from friends and stuff, you just got to get on with it. Don't compare yourself to other people. Everyone's on a different path, and everyone will get where they need to be eventually. It just might take a different route. So hopefully that's covered something in the way of doing a degree. I know it's going to be different for everyone, but if anyone has any questions about it, I'm more than happy to answer.
Thanks very much, Mark. So just while we're waiting, if anybody else got questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But just while we're waiting for that, Tom has shared the link in the chat for an existing PhD offer that is working in conjunction with Severn Rivers Trust and Bournemouth University, I believe. I think that is a fully funded PhD opportunity in salmon and freshwater.
Yes.
So that's of interest. Do you know more on that, Mark?
Yeah, so there's actually 2 PhDs that have literally just been advertised, I think, a couple of days ago. So there's that one. I don't know which one that is, but one of them is studying salmon smolts on the Severn, and there's one down based more around Bournemouth, I think. So yeah, have a look at those. And they are both supervised by my supervisors, who are very good, very nice. I know some people sometimes struggle if you don't get a good supervisor, but I can certainly recommend the supervisors on those 2 degrees. So yeah, if you want to do a PhD in salmon, studying salmon, I'd recommend those ones.
Cool. We haven't had any other questions in, so I think you've got off lightly there, Mark.
Probably because I did such a bad job.
No, not at all. If anybody thinks of any other questions for Mark, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll either cover them. Oh, that one's coming. One just saying thanks. Do you think you'll pursue a postdoctorate, Mark?
I'm not sure at the moment. I don't think I want to have a long career fully in academia, but that doesn't mean that I won't do a postdoc. because I think you can get an awful lot out of a postdoc. So yeah, at the moment I'm undecided.
Okay. And another one that's come in is, how did you know that you wanted to do a PhD?
Well, I guess, as I said, once I finished my master's, I hated research, but I think I was just a bit burnt out from it. But also I think it was because my research project I did in my master's degree, I only had a small amount of time to do it. So I only had like 3 months or similar, maybe half a year to a year to actually start the project, do the project, finish the project, write it up, all of that. So you don't actually have that much time to do any sort of significant research. So with a PhD, you actually have a lot more time, obviously 3 years plus to get through the whole sort of scientific process of designing the project, seeing it through to the end. So that was one of the reasons. I also found that when I was trying to find research jobs, that, you know, quite often those research assistant jobs I did were just basic field work, like field assistant jobs, which I really enjoy. I love the field work, but I felt a little bit empty at the end of it, having no say in what happens with the data, or the design of the experiments. So, you know, that side of things meant that I wanted to actually do something that allowed me to spend a lot of time doing research and doing the whole research project basically. And I found that, you know, I felt doing a PhD was a good way to do that, and also to actually develop my skills as a researcher.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so one more that's coming. I know yours is coming, Tom, but we'll come back to that. So this is from Emma. So she's currently in her 3rd year of her PhD, and she's feeling similar to how you did when you left your masters. Would you have any advice for her? Well,
you're probably more experienced in that than me now. If you're doing 3 years, I'll probably feel the same. Yeah, at the end of my masters, I guess I just took a little bit of a break. So I just went traveling and tried to just forget about things for a while and enjoy just having a bit more of a simple lifestyle for a bit. And then I just came back to it, and I just felt, you know, I felt like I'd lost the spark a little bit at the end of the masters, and after I'd been traveling for a bit, and actually when I got into other jobs that, you know, weren't really research based, I realized that actually, you know, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do research. So I don't know if that's that helpful for you, but you know, that's what I found.
Okay, she's put a follow-up to that. She said she came straight from her undergraduate degree, so potentially where she went wrong. I'm
yeah,
sure you'll still enjoy your PhD in your 3rd year.
That's going to be, yeah, that's a lot of years of just straight university, isn't it? So yeah, hopefully, maybe if you've not already got a postdoc or anything lined up, then yeah, maybe just take a short break and you'll be feeling renewed afterwards.
And then we've just got one last quick question from Tom, which is related to the shad, and it says, what is the highest recorded shad so far? Don't know whether you want to elaborate on that, Tom.
Well, is that furthest through the river? So we've had, well, that I'll answer that.
Yeah, he said it was highest through the river. Yeah.
So we've got two different types of tags that we use. So there's the acoustic tag, which I mentioned, which sends out a ping, and we can actually tell where in the river the fish is. But we also have the pit tags, which are like the microchips, and they only work on a very sort of close range. So we can only use those through the fish passes. So we've had fish through the Diglis fish pass with the pit tag, but we haven't had any with the acoustic tag. So basically, we can only tell that we've had fish upstream of Diglis fish pass, but hopefully this year we'll have some acoustic tagged fish through, and then we'll be able to tell where in the river those get to after going through Diglis. Other than that, on the river team, we've had the acoustic tag fish go all the way upstream of the furthest upstream modified weir. So those 2 weirs, they're having not too many problems with.
Cool. Right. We have just got one more that's come in. Go on. We'll go for that, and then we'll go on to the last talk. It's from Azalea, and it's: do you reckon to do a PhD directly after masters, or go for working experience first?
Well, I'd say that all my work experience helped me get the PhD, and also, you know, it gave me a bit more experience what life's like outside of university, outside of academia, outside of learning and doing a degree. So I think, yeah, as Francisca says, you know, I think getting some experience outside of academia is very good, but then I wouldn't say it's a bad idea to go straight into a PhD. I think a lot of people do it, but I think it's, you know, a bit of a cop out, but I think it's a personal preference.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, Mark. I hope that was useful for people who might be considering doing a PhD. If you've got any other questions, pop them in the chat, and we'll either cover them in the Q&A session, or we'll go back to Mark and then we'll come back with the answers for you.
Yeah, I'll stick around for the Q&A.
Yeah. Mark, would you mind sticking your email address in the chat, just if anybody's got direct questions they wanted to go to you, that would be great. Cool. So the last talk that we've got today is from myself. So it's on the benefits of volunteering. So just bear with me and I'll share this with you. Can you all see that now? I'm going to presume yes.
No, sorry, we can't.
No. Okay, hang on. Let me stop it and start again. Put it on this screen. How's if I press share? There we go. Can you see that now?
Yeah, good to go.
Yeah, cool. Fab. So yeah, so you've heard various bits from me across the day, and you've also heard from various different professionals right across the afternoon in their different roles within the sector. Hopefully you've identified sort of one recurring theme across all of this, and that relates to volunteering. It's featured in pretty much everybody's journey to their existing roles. And as many others have said, we cannot stress enough the value that volunteering holds within this sector. So I'm just going to go through a bit more about volunteering, what it is, and some of the benefits of doing it. It's going to move on. Is it going to work for me?
Alice, just so you know, we can see your notes and next slide.
Okay, hang on, let me. Go on to here. Bear with me a second, guys.
Yeah, I'm not sure you can present a PowerPoint on Zoom in that presenter view. I've tried to do it before with the notes. You can.
Okay, is it done on thing? I might just have to kind of work through it then. Bear with me a second.
Unless I might just not have worked out how to do it.
No, it's probably the way I've done it. Can you see that now? Can anybody see that or not?
Yeah.
So if I just go into this, do you still see the notes, or do you see the?
No, it's just the screen.
Say that again, Tom?
It's just the screen there, that's fine.
Okay, so that's fine. Cool. So you still just see the next one that's moved on, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We'll go from here then. So yeah, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about volunteering. As sort of many of the others have kind of started with, I thought I'd give a bit of brief introduction to myself and sort of my route into the sector. So I took a fairly traditional route, having been to college, studied sciences and geography, and then I went on to do an undergraduate degree in countryside management at Aberystwyth. As part of my degree, I was able to do a placement year, which for me was invaluable. I did this on the Great Orme in North Wales as a country park warden. It was really good experience for kind of giving an insight into working in the conservation sector. And then out of university, I was lucky enough to land a job pretty much straight away as a rights of way officer with Worcestershire County Council. After 2 roles and sort of 5 years of working in rights of way, I then became the volunteering officer with Severn Rivers Trust, which I started last October, and is a role I currently do now. Along the way, though, I've done lots of volunteering. In fact, it all sort of started with volunteering as I began volunteering when I was still at school. So I started with the National Trust on Marsden Moor, just kind of going out monthly with their work parties. And then since then, I've taken pretty much any volunteering opportunity I could, including volunteering throughout university with their conservation volunteers, doing a week's volunteering with Trees for Life, and then more recently doing volunteer work with Worcestershire Wildlife Trust. So in terms of sort of my role as the volunteering officer, I'm responsible for coordinating the volunteer activities for the Unlocking the Severn project. So this includes working with the citizen science volunteers, practical habitat conservation volunteers, student placements if we have those on, and also with some corporate volunteering groups. And part of the role as a volunteering officer is I'm responsible for ensuring that these activities occur safely and that the volunteers also get something out of giving their time. So what is this kind of volunteering malarkey we keep talking about? Well, it can kind of be split into sort of 3 main principles. The first being that it should be done by free will, so should be done by choice. Nobody should be forced into doing volunteering. The second is that it shouldn't be paid. So it shouldn't be done for financial gain. And then the third is that it's about making a difference. So volunteering should benefit something or someone outside of your family, such as a local community or neighbourhood. And in the context that we're sort of talking about, volunteering is generally any activity that involves spending time unpaid, doing something that benefits the environment or an individual or group linked to the environment. And volunteering takes place in all areas of society, so it can be in so many different forms. It's not something that's unique to the conservation sector. No matter what you kind of look at out there, there'll be volunteering roles related to it. But specifically within the conservation sector, there's so many different opportunities and roles depending on what your particular interests are or what you want to gain from that experience. And here's just a few examples of the types of volunteer roles that are currently out there from a quick search that I did. So they include sort of your more well-known ones, such as ranger roles or practical habitat management roles. But there's also some that are perhaps kind of less well-known. And these include volunteer roles related to social media and marketing, so some of the stuff that Corinne touched on earlier. And there are also volunteer roles relating to kind of helping with admin in organisations and also research, amongst many others that are here. And it's worth saying there will be a role out there for everyone. It might just take a bit more finding, but no matter what your interests are or what skills you've got, there'll generally be a role out there that will work for you. So I thought we'd now look at some of the benefits of volunteering. So there's so many different reasons why people choose to volunteer. Some of these will include people wanting to give something back or make a difference to the lives of others. You know, some people might want to give something back to their local environment or their local organisation that's working in their area. You know, it might also be a case of wanting to put their skills to good use sort of beyond their employment. So we have one volunteer who works for the Environment Agency. He's extremely knowledgeable when it comes to fish, and he's offered to volunteer with Severn Rivers Trust on some of our projects to kind of share his knowledge and expertise. You know, that's beyond his current role, but it would work to our advantage, and some of our project managers or other volunteers can benefit from his knowledge and expertise. But you note that all of these benefits kind of relate to things that are gained out of people volunteering rather than what the volunteer themselves gains. So I thought we'd now look at the flip side of that, so what there is to be gained from volunteering, because there are definitely lots of benefits to the volunteer themselves. And this can include various things such as improved health and well-being, which can be gained from sort of personal achievements from volunteering, carrying out, physical activities themselves, and just generally having a sense of purpose as a result of doing volunteering. And there are also sort of personal growth to be gained, and this can include sort of gaining new skills, developing new existing skills or knowledge, and gaining confidence through doing volunteering. I know quite a few people have referred to confidence throughout this afternoon, and that's something that can definitely be gained and enhanced from carrying out volunteer work. Many people also volunteer for the sort of social life that it provides. So volunteering is a great way for meeting new people, socialising, and also getting out and getting to know your local community. But specifically from an employment perspective, there's also so many benefits to be gained from volunteering. Employability can directly be increased through volunteering, through the skills and experiences gained. And having volunteering on your CV can significantly enhance it, and should definitely be, included and considered of a high value to that CV. We'll touch a bit later on how some people might not give it such high value and not be inclined to include it within their CVs and applications, but it definitely should be there. It also provides opportunities to try out different roles. So you might be considering a career change, or you might be just generally looking to start a career in a particular role or with a particular organisation. And particularly in the case of career changes, it's a great way to kind of gain experience in a completely new field of work, which can then help you with that transition in career. And quite often, academia is not enough to get a job within this sector. We touched on it several times this afternoon about the combination of experience and academia. So volunteering can help you stand out on these job applications, and it's a great way for you to sort of network with some of these potential employers or other organisations that you might be interested in. And then here we've just got some quotes from some of the volunteers who have taken part in some of the work that we've done through Unlocking the Severn. So there's just 3 here across the different years of the project. And you'll see that they link to some of the benefits that we've sort of just discussed earlier. So, improved knowledge. So the first one, they've learned more about fish and kind of just generally improved their knowledge in that area. And the second one, refers to improved confidence through carrying out that volunteer work. And then in the last one, helping with career progression. So this volunteer helped with the green team that Aaron referred to earlier on Diglas Island, and now they're working as an apprentice ranger in Dorset. So that experience of volunteering with the green team has directly contributed to them being able to pursue that as a career. But it's not just the volunteers themselves that hold that volunteer experience in high regard. Here are a couple of quotes sort of from employers' perspective on how they view volunteering on both applications and CVs they receive. So the first is from an employer recruiting through charity jobs, and they kind of reiterate the importance of including volunteering within applications, and also state that there may be skills and traits to be gained from volunteering that you wouldn't even know you're gaining, and that kind of links to some of these transferable skills that can be gained from other experiences in other areas of work as well. So volunteering doesn't necessarily need to be directly related to the conservation sector in order to be considered valuable in getting a job in this sector. So any volunteering can provide you with some of these traits. And the other quote is one kind of more specifically relating to this sector. And it's from Alice, who you heard from earlier with the workshop on job interviews. And she sort of states that the value even in short-term or one-off volunteering opportunities can give you, learning skills such as surveying techniques or species ID that can be gained from these short volunteering periods can be really valuable. And she also states, candidates who have this type of experience, standing out when it comes to shortlisting. And I did find one bit of research that was quite interesting that suggested that, you know, there's a figure of around 80% of managers would more likely consider a candidate that's got volunteer experience, and in some respects they'd be willing to kind of overlook other flaws. So again, it just reiterates the value of this, you know, to building your careers. So what are some of the things that you should, you know, take into consideration when you're looking for volunteer opportunities? And the first of these is to kind of think of what your end goal might be. So this will usually tie in with some of the benefits that we've already looked at. But for example, it might be that you have an end goal of gaining employment with a particular organisation or doing a particular role. Or it might just be, you know, to improve your knowledge or experience in a certain area, or even just to meet new people. But it's definitely worth thinking about that end goal at the start when you're looking for different volunteer opportunities. Consider your interests. So volunteering should be fun, and you're definitely going to get more out of it if it's doing something that you're interested in. A bit like Mark said with the PhD, you know, you're only going to pursue it and stick with it if it's something that's interesting to you, and the same applies with volunteering. And it's also important to kind of consider how much time you have. You know, no matter how much time you do have, there'll be a volunteer role there for you. But, you know, many organisations will offer volunteering across weekdays and weekends, and in certain situations, there's kind of seasonal or some more like one-off opportunities. So, example, we do the seasonal shad monitoring that takes place in the spring. You might be able to find an opportunity that fits in with, you know, a university holidays, or that you can do on weekends. Within my own sort of experience of volunteering, I've done a combination of more regular weekly or monthly volunteering, but I've also done a sort of week's block of residential volunteering with Trees for Life. So yeah, so there's a whole range of different things out there, but it is worth considering the time that you've got to give to volunteering. The other thing is considering your current skill set. So, you know, it might be that you have your existing skills that you can use to help an organisation or an individual, or, you know, you might think I've got a good, you know, skill set in this area, but therefore I want to build up another skill set somewhere else. So definitely consider what you kind of have to start off with, and again, linking back to your end goal, what you want to gain from it. And then finally, it's also worth sort of considering your limitations. You know, not all volunteer opportunities will be suitable for everyone. So some limitations could relate to, you know, other commitments, which could be time or physical restrictions. But volunteering shouldn't, you know, it should never be a case of you being out of pocket from doing it. So if you do have, you know, certain limitations that you think, well, I don't want it to be a limitation, try contacting the organisations and sort of explaining that to them, because quite often, you know, they will try if they can to remove some of those barriers for you. I won't say they necessarily always be able to, but it's definitely worth, you know, knowing what those limitations are and having a conversation, seeing whether some of those could be removed. And then in terms of sort of finding some of these opportunities, the best starting point really is to kind of research some of the different organisations. I know various people have touched on some of these organisations, but contact them directly, you know, research around, see what's out there. If you have a particular organisation in your sights, definitely contact them, you know, directly. Even if they don't have a volunteer opportunity advertised, it might be that they can set something up for you. And in terms of looking more general websites, there's sort of 4 listed here. The top 2, so Environment Job and Countryside Job Service, are sort of specifically targeted at countryside and sort of conservation type jobs. And they have dedicated volunteer sections within their websites. And then Nature Volunteering, this is it's a bit newer. I think it's only been a few years old, but that they do it by asking you a certain number of questions, and then checking out some opportunities based on your answers to those questions. So that website's quite good if you're not really sure what role you might be looking for. They can sort of suggest some that you might want to look at. And then I've also included Charity Job, because although it's not specifically targeted at environmental jobs, they do occasionally have conservation opportunities that come up through there. So it's worth keeping an eye on those. And we will put the links to these websites within the chat as well if you want to check them out. And then here is just a selection of some of the organisations that you might want to, consider volunteering with or contact to see what they've got available. Some of the more well-known ones, so we've got Canal Rivers Trust, Severn Rivers Trust, and the Environment Agency. So I know those have kind of been spoken about to a certain extent today, but there are also some sort of more obscure ones there. So Riverfly Partnership, you may not have been aware of, but they occasionally have opportunities available. And again, just depending on what your interests are and what you want to gain from it will likely determine the organisation that you contact regarding volunteering. And I thought I'd just sort of briefly touch on some of the current opportunities that we as Unlocking the Severn and Severn Rivers Trust have. So Aaron briefly referred to the Conservation Task Force earlier. So this is a practical group that carry out work around the Severn and the Unlocking the Severn catchment in Gloucestershire, Worcestershire and Shropshire. So they operate on a fortnightly basis. And then we have our seasonal citizen science monitoring. So as I said, for the shad monitoring, so this happens in the spring. So we're currently recruiting volunteers for that. And like I said, that's seasonal, only in the spring. And then we have, on a slightly more ad hoc basis, is the Diglis Island Guide. So they provide opportunities to show people around the island at Diglis and also the fish pass. So again, even in our existing opportunities, you can see the difference in sort of time commitments that might be required, in the seasonality of them. And that is a sort of whistle-stop tour of volunteering. Any questions? Stop sharing my screen.
Doesn't look like we've had any for you, Alice, but that was really good. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing those links, Aaron.
Yeah,
Right.
well done. It's a really difficult, massively variable thing to cover, isn't it? One little talk on volunteering.
Yeah.
I think the most important thing is if you are volunteering, is just join it. And if you like the people that are running the activities, then that's a real plus point. We might not be doing very nice stuff, repeat and having to repeat doing something onerous, but eventually the good do the good stuff. But you definitely need to do the spade work and putting some hours in.
Yeah. Okay, so if we haven't got any more questions directly related to volunteering, we will move on to the question and answer session. So there were a few questions that came up in some of the earlier talks that we didn't manage to answer. Alice, are you still on the call? Is she still here or is she?
I can see it.
Yeah, she's there. You're on mute, Alice. But we have a question that came in at the end of yours, which was, can you suggest how you can make the most of a niche skill set in an interview?
Oh, good question. So I guess it depends what the role is that you're going for, because it might be that a niche skill set will put you head and shoulders above the rest of the field, because it's something that's really relevant to the role. In which case you should really sell it and emphasize it, and show how it really makes you the perfect candidate for the role. Might be something like your fish ID skills that you've gained as an angler, meaning that you really know all your different fish species and can identify them at a glance, which we do get some applicants with that kind of knowledge, and that's amazing. Or it might be that skill isn't necessarily directly relevant to the role. I'm guessing this is probably the case in the kind of the question you're asking, in which case don't discount it. There might be some really valuable skills that you've gained from developing that niche skill set. So for example, if it's your fish ID skills, could you apply that to then more broadly other types of species identification, so that you can learn a wider range of relevant species and learn to identify them quickly, because you've already built up that aptitude of what to look for when surveying different animals or plants or species. Or even more broadly, it might be about your kind of patience, your determination, your ability to pick up new information and apply it in different contexts. So yeah, don't think that just because something is very specific and technical that it's not relevant to a role, because I think you can pretty much always, if it's something you're really passionate about and you've put work and dedication into developing, you can find a way to use it as to highlight something that you'll bring to the table in a role.
Cool, thanks very much. So one of the other questions that we had from an earlier talk was in relation to the apprenticeship, so Aaron and Corin. And it was, can you do an apprenticeship as a career change or apprenticeships aimed at younger age groups?
Yeah, I think definitely. I don't think age is a factor that impacts at all, really. As long as you're in the right position to commit to it, in terms of, obviously it's quite a small salary, that's the word I'm looking for. It's quite a small salary. If you're able to take that, then I think the opportunity is definitely there for anyone.
I've just had a look, Alice, at Ginger Nut Training, which offers my apprenticeships, and they do take anybody basically, any age. There's a lot of people that do it as sort of like part of their job. So if, for example, if they want to get more experience in a different part of their job, then they will do an apprenticeship alongside that. So yeah, it's definitely available to anybody.
I hope that answers the question. So then we've answered the one, I think, on international students, haven't we, Erin? Yep, so that one's fine. So then there's just a couple more that have come into the chat. So what advice, I'm not sure who this is for yet. So what advice would you give for planning your next steps? What do you offer after, what do you do after you graduate? I have a good idea what I would like to do, but slightly stressing about which path to follow first. Who wants to take that one?
I can jump in for starters on that one, Alice, while others are thinking. If you haven't seen it already, I'd really recommend going to our YouTube channel to check out the first Careers in River Conservation event that we did, the recording of that, because there's an exercise which is a really good place to start if you're just at the very beginning of your job hunt, and I'll share a link to it in the chat now. But it's a kind of visualization exercise and a series of questions that you can go through and think about, really what type of work environment might suit you, what type of role, whether you're looking for something in a particular location or in a particular field of work, or what kind of organisation, whether you want a big team, a small team, more independent, self-led work, or more directed, and that kind of thing. And I think answering those kind of questions, which can feel a little bit like, I think the temptation is to just get straight stuck in and start looking through all the jobs listings and looking at what's out there. But if you do step back and write yourself some answers just really quick, it only needs to take 10 minutes, 15 minutes of your kind of initial responses. I think you'll get a much better idea of actually where to start, because it'll point you like, what kind of organizations should I be researching, and what kind of jobs am I actually looking for, to refine your search before you begin, because otherwise it can be really bewildering. There's so many jobs out there and so many job pages, and especially with things like LinkedIn and Indeed, where there's just hundreds and hundreds of listings, it can be a bit impossible to know where to start. So I'd really advise just going, I'll share the link now and go and check that out and work through those questions as a starting point, to then decide what to do next.
Just going to jump on that point, Alice, a really important one. I think it is a case of stepping back and thinking before you charge into it. I'm a big fan of a mind map, so just getting information out on paper, in whatever format you choose to do that. Maybe just as a little bit of a brain splurge, everything you're interested in, and then just start having a look around where those different points are going to lead you to. But I'd say don't be stressed straight away. Just, get your thoughts out there, and it might take a few days or a few weeks or whatever. Just keep adding to it and keep thinking about it. But yeah, don't charge off straight away.
I think the other thing to consider there is, and people touched on it earlier, was don't worry about going straight into your ideal job or your perfect full-time job. Lots of us have done shorter term placements or contracts in order to get to where we are today. So don't rule those out, because they're amazing experience, even if they are short term. You never know what they're going to lead to. I mean, look at Dewi's example. Was it a month's contract he had, Dewi, and you're still here?
yeah, true. Also, I always find what was really helpful was working with charismatic colleagues, people that are really good practitioners, that somehow some of their skill set actually brushes up on you, so you can all of a sudden what you think you'd like to do, like I thought I wanted to be a nature reserve warden inside a forest counting things, wasn't what I wanted to do at all. I'm now a community engagement person. That I need to be in with a lot of people in order to be happy with my career. So, yeah, so you just have to mix and match.
Thanks, Zoe.
Another point to make on that, actually, Alice, if okay.
Yep.
Just to jump in and say that we also understand that if you need to pay the bills and just get a job at bar work or hospitality, or, you know, we totally get that. You can't necessarily be hunting for jobs and doing loads of applications and interviews and holding out, like you say, for that dream job. So remember that those other jobs, not necessarily in your dream career, are still really valuable. And it doesn't mean, because you didn't get straight into a job after uni or after an apprenticeship, then you're ruled out of coming back into conservation. We really value the skills that come from all different sectors. So you might end up pursuing quite a different career and then circling back around to conservation and bring so much back with you, whether that's in communications or in business and finance. We need lots of different skills, not just people who can do the more traditional kind of surveys and species work in river conservation. So even if you end up having quite a long break and then thinking, oh, I'd like to come back to conservation and pursue my passion, don't rule yourself out of it. We really are keen to have applications from a whole range of different backgrounds and jobs.
Thanks, Alice. So one that maybe Mark, maybe one for Mark and Karen and anybody else who's done a Masters. So it's from Francesca. We touched on a Masters earlier. Would you recommend specific sort of river management and fresh water, or a more general Master such as biodiversity and conservation?
My first answer to that would be, what are you interested in? You know, follow what you are interested in. You know, if it's something you think is going to lead to a job, but actually is something that you're going to hate for a year, don't do it, because Masters are hard work. You know, it's got to be something that you're passionate about. So I would say first and foremost, follow your heart, and then you will gain experience from that. You know, as long as it's slightly related, you will gain valuable experience from that.
Yeah, I think as well, you've got different Masters are more relevant for different things. So like if you wanted to go and do a PhD or work in research, then you'd probably be looking at doing an MRes, like a research Masters in anything relevant to where you're a PhD, or maybe you don't want to do a PhD but you want to get into research some other way, do something relevant to that. And I think, you know, there are other Masters. You can do Masters in sort of ecological management and things like that, so they'd be more relevant to other jobs, I think. So yeah, it's quite specific to where you want to go after your Masters. So have a think about that before you just jump in and do one, I think.
Thanks, Mark. So one back on the apprenticeship, sorry, I missed this one before. So it's, will there be more waterways environment apprenticeships? So Aaron?
Yeah, I think they do it as either yearly or 2 yearly, biannual, I don't know what it is, every 2 years. But I think it's only Bridgewater and Taunton College that do waterway environment apprentice specifically. I'm the only person at the moment who's doing it from the Canal Rivers Trust, but there are 30 others, I think, from Environment Agency and Natural England as well. So it is quite niche, but there is also, yeah, plenty of opportunity to do it.
Right, unless you are aware of any others I've missed in the chat here, and I think we've covered all of the back ones that we had. So if anybody's got any sort of last questions that they want to ask, feel free to put them in the chat. While we've got these professionals here. Oh, got one coming.
Whilst people are thinking about that, I just want to reiterate the points of really building up your social media. There's like that sort of ability of having LinkedIn. Like when I applied for this job, you know, Alice interviewed me, and it popped up on my feed that she was checking me out on LinkedIn. So I immediately knew who was interviewing me. So I was able to go back and read up about her career pathing. So I was able to, hopefully, that sort of background research came across in my interview, that I was able to link up similar experiences we've got. Just can't stress it enough, really. It's just a brilliant platform. Same on Facebook, you know, linking in with sort of organisations that are on there, like IFM, Butterfly Conservation, other rivers trusts, just able to track all these fantastic projects that are happening all the time. And you can keep yourself super up to date really quick. As the rest of my team will know, I can chat for England, so I don't want to carry on. I don't want to carry on too much.
Right, so we've just had so one, Ruth, regarding copying from the chat text. If you want to just drop me an email, Ruth, I will respond with all of the links that we've had from here. Again, if anybody else is having issues being able to access the links that we've shared, if you want to drop us an email, we can send you those links directly. Thank you for the comment, Reshu. It's really nice to hear that you found it useful. And then we've had another question in from Emma. So if volunteering isn't available near you in the area you're interested in, is there any other way to broaden your skill set and gain experience? I think the thing I'd say with that is I'd be very surprised if there's no volunteering opportunities near you, because there are so many organisations that are offering it. So definitely kind of, you know, have a look on all of the sites that we suggested. But if there isn't anything directly in your area, have a look for some perhaps remote volunteer opportunities. We haven't touched on them so much today, but some organisations will have opportunities that don't necessarily require you to be in that area, but you could still help, be it admin or with you know, perhaps some online recording monitoring. So definitely have a look for kind of remote opportunities. And then in terms of other ways that you can broaden your skill set and gain experience, you know, don't underestimate any transferable skills from other volunteer opportunities or experiences, whether they relate to this sector or not. There's still ways that you can kind of build that skill set and gain experience. So I hope that helps with that.
I'd just say on that one as well, Alice, that I do encourage people to make your own volunteering opportunities as well. So it might not be a formal placement or offer from an organisation, but that guaranteed you'll have a park or a pathway or a canal or river near you that could do with someone just walking along and picking up litter regularly, or doing a survey, a vegetation survey or survey. And the beauty of having smartphones and programs like iRecord and iSpot, you can really quickly log on, find out what a species is, and actually make your own record of it, and contribute to kind of national surveys or things like the big butterfly count or bumblebee counts, or bird spotting and things. So there are ways that you can kind of link into national programs, citizen science data collection, or just practical work where you're helping by picking up litter and stopping it entering the ocean. And that does count as well. It just shows that just bit of extra care, bit of extra enthusiasm to take part and help out. And that's something you could talk about in an interview for sure. Or maybe like fundraising for a local charity or organisation, doing something that will just contribute and help. It doesn't necessarily need to be a formal volunteering role.
Thanks, Alice. So one here is there an undergraduate degree that we would recommend if we're looking specifically to work in river restoration? And I noticed Jono has responded with there's apparently a good rivers degree at Gloucester. So thank you, Jono. Anybody else knows of any other specific degrees in river restoration? No? Okay, perhaps check out that one at Gloucester, I would say is the best bet there. And then glad you found it useful, Charlotte. Really hope you managed to get some volunteer opportunities off the back of this. Somebody else has come back in and said they'd recommend geography degrees for covering some of the river restoration sites. So obviously we've got a couple of guys here that have done geography.
I should probably put a plug in for Worcester Uni, and one of our trustees is a professor of river science at the University of Worcester, and their geography course has some fantastic modules on river surveying and just river geography generally. So that's definitely one to check out if you're interested.
I'm a Worcester Uni graduate.
Nice one, Dewi. Would you recommend it?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Good.
Yeah,
Correct answer.
yeah, absolutely, completely.
And then just another one on sort of building up the skill set. Opal do citizen science surveys and courses, so that you can find stuff through there. And also, yeah, there's lots of different courses out there. The RRC do loads. Field Studies Council is really good for little bits of courses that you can do fairly cheaply. And also, you know, things like the Wildlife Trust. Some of the organisations we touched earlier on will have different courses around.
There's quite a lot of cheap courses, I think, that the FSC have recorded, a bit like we've done now, and they've just posted them all online. So
yeah,
you can do a lot of sort of reading up just on that, really. So what do they call it? I don't know what they call the modules now, but they made them all really cheap and they posted them all online. I think they cost like £5 to attend if you've done it, but yeah, they're pretty good.
Cool. I think that's it that we've got questions wise. So thank you very much for joining us today, both those that have kind of given talks and those that, you know, come along to find out what we're about. Hope you found it useful. We have recorded it. We will try and get it up on the Unlocking the Severn YouTube. So if anybody's missed bits of it and want to kind of go back over it or refresh their memory. And I will also put the slides together from the various different talks, and I'll try and share those with you as well. I think we have managed to answer most of the questions, and there's perhaps one earlier that we were going to do a bit more follow-up on, but we'll double check that. If there's any we've missed, we'll come back to you with some of the answers. Fab. Thank you very much. We'll leave it there.
Well done. Nice one.
Nice one. Thank you,
Good work,
everybody.
guys.
Cheers.
Erin, have you got the chat?
Yeah, most of it, yeah.
Stop the recording of it.